The thin light of dawn broke across Blackwater Bay in wavering streaks of rose and gold, painting the water like war-torn glass. Sea mists clung to the hulks of anchored carracks and galleys, their tar-black hulls whispering against the tide with the hush of conspirators. Sansa Stark stood at the forecastle rail of Lord Baelish's sleek Myrish cutter, her gloved fingers curled around the salt-rimmed wood. Wind nussed the auburn hair she wore, unbound in defiance of every southern dictate, and the cold brine carried the memory of the north to her lungs. Each breath steadied her, though the red keep loomed ahead like the maw of some colossal beast. Its towers pierced the haze, and the banner of the lion snapped above Maegor's holdfast, brazen as ever. She told herself she would not be devoured. She had not come as a lamb. She had come as the wolf she had learned to be. Behind her, Lord Petyr Baelish's footsteps made no sound. He had a talent for silent approach, as if he preferred the world to meet him always by surprise. "King's Landing is as beautiful as you remember, my lady," he said softly, leaning on the rail with a practiced elegance that hid the tension of his grip. "And as dangerous. Best keep your wits about you." His smile was thin as a cat's whisker. Sansa watched the curtain wall glide closer and thought of the last time she had seen it. The day Joffrey had died with a purple throat, and the court's shrieks echoing from marble to marble. She had fled in terror, a pawn switched to another square. Now she returned with years carved into her heart, and with the mind that had studied every move Baelish had ever made. Sansa did not answer him at once. The gulls shrieked overhead, and in each pulse of wingbeat she counted the choices that had brought her here. The Battle of the Bastards, the banners of House Stark rising again, Jon's crown of ice in the north, and Littlefinger's whispered counsel that a queen of Winterfell must treat with the queen of the south if war against the Night King were to be won. He had spoken of alliances, dowries, hostages returned, but Sansa heard the quieter promise beneath. Proximity to the Iron Throne would nourish Baelish's unending hunger. She had weighed that hunger against the Norse need, and decided she could dance with knives if she knew where each blade lay. The cutter kissed the wharf. Gold cloaks and crimson cloaks and steel caps marched forward, trumpets braying a brittle fanfare that scattered gulls into the dawn. Sansa descended first, her shadow long across the moss-slick planks. She wore a gown of deep gray wool, embroidered with white weirwood leaves. The direwolf stitched argent at her collar. A northern queen's garb, practical yet iron-wrought in its meaning. Brienne of Tarth followed, her armor catching the first sun like hammered dawn. The guards parted for them with wary deference. Only then did Littlefinger alight, his cloak of black velvet sweeping the damp boards. The ship's captain bowed. Petyr pressed a coin into his palm. Every moment, every gesture, he paid and purchased invisibly. They ascended the zigzagging ramps toward the city gate. King's Landing smelled the same: boiled leather, tanner's lime, bread ovens and midden heaps, scented oils masking rot. The bustle struck familiar chords in Sansa's bones, but no longer did it drown her in fear. She kept her eyes forward, tracing the crimson path laid by royal guards to the Red Keep's looming barbican. Courtiers were already gathering in the outer yard, gossip flitting like caged sparrows around her. The northern girl returned, they whispered. The Rose of Winterfell, who waltzed with death. But their eyes shifted to Littlefinger more often, as one might watch a wildfire barrel, uncertain of the wind. Queen Cersei had summoned her audience for midday in the throne room, enough hours for rumors to ferment. Baelish disappeared into the warren of corridors. "To arrange our welcome," he claimed. Sansa let him go. In his absence she toured the keep that had once been her prison, learning each stone anew. She found that the ceiling seemed lower now, the halls narrower, as though she had grown too large for the gilded cage. In the Tower of the Hand, she drank spiced wine with Sir Bronn, newly raised to lordship over some tract of Riverlander mud. He spoke of sellswords and sieges, but his eyes rested on her with something like respectful wariness. Wolves with swords at their side were not the little birds he remembered. By the time the bells tolled midday, the throne room doors boomed open on a gust of pungent perfume and candle smoke. Columns of red marble flanked an aisle strewn with flecks of sunlight, and at its far end, the Iron Throne crouched like a dark deity, blades rusted into the shape of ambition. Cersei Lannister sat upon it in a carapace of black silk and golden pauldrons, her blonde hair shorn to a gleaming helm. To her right stood Qyburn, pallid as moonlit parchment. To her left, Sir Gregor, motionless in that hulking armor that disguised the monstrous thing he had become. Sansa advanced alone under the vaulted ceiling. The long train of her gown whispered across the floor. She knelt neither fully nor humbly, one knee dipped, but her chin remained level. "Your Grace," she said, voice carrying without tremor. "The North brings greetings." Cersei's red lips curved. "A greeting that cost precious daylight, Lady Stark. Yet daylight is cheap." She studied Sansa like one might a gem suspected of flaw. "Lord Baelish assured us you came in good faith. Let us hope his assurances weigh more than his oaths once did." There it began. The subtle lattice work of barbs and honeyed civility. Sansa let the Queen circle her with questions about Jon's plans, Winterfell's harvests, the alliances Daenerys Targaryen forged across the sea. She offered truths salted with omissions. Littlefinger re-emerged at her side, presenting letters and parchments, signed at White Harbor, granting safe passage for grain convoys. He smiled when Cersei praised his foresight, but his eyes flicked to Sansa for the flicker of approval he craved. She gave him none. Court dispersed to a feast in Maegor's Holdfast. Tables sagged beneath oranges sliced into suns, swans glazed in honey, and flagons of arbor gold. The hall glittered, echoes of laughter gilding every arch. Yet beneath the music's lilting strings hummed something colder. Littlefinger glided from lord to lady, sowing compliments, harvesting whispers. Sansa watched him spin webs that had once ensnared her. Now she studied the pattern, counting threads. Near midnight she withdrew to the chambers assigned her, the very suite once given to her as Joffrey's betrothed. Brienne posted outside the door, sword unsheathed. Within, coals glowed low. Sansa unfastened her cloak and discovered a folded parchment on the dressing table, sealed in sand-colored wax. No sigil. She cracked it. Inside, a single sentence in Pettir's elegant hand: "The citadel of trust is one stone by stone." Beneath, an unfinished circle. Sansa's breath stilled. That sigil, half drawn, was the emblem he had once fashioned for her in secret correspondence, a promise of shared destiny. It had bound her once with silken chains. Now she saw the circle's open mouth as a wolf might spy a snare. Sleep came fitfully. When it did, she dreamt of snow falling on the Iron Throne, whitening every blade. In the dream, Pettir stood at its foot, beckoning, but when she stepped forward, the snow melted into blood. She woke before dawn, heart iron in her chest. Candlelight licked the walls. She dressed in silence, fastening her cloak of direwolf fur. Today, she decided, the snare would close on the hunter. Brienne escorted her through silent passageways to the small council chamber. The primrose sky filtered through arrow slits. There, waiting, sat Lord Varys, shrouded in layers of powder blue silk. He gestured to the seat beside him. "I trust you received our gift." His voice was soft, laced with apology. "We could not leave you unguided in the dark." "You knew he would write," Sansa said. "I knew he could not resist reminding you of old debts. Men intoxicated with their own cleverness often boast in whispers." Varys inclined his bald head. "Some debts are better settled before they compound." Footsteps sounded, Baelish entering, face alight with feigned surprise. "Ah, my lords, my lady, plotting so early." His glance slid over Varys like oil over water. He took the chair opposite Sansa, folding his hands atop the polished table. "I trust you slept well." "As well as one can in a house of ghosts," Sansa replied. She produced the parchment and slid it across the table. "Your writing improves, Lord Baelish." A flicker crossed his hawkish eyes. Alarm masked his amusement. "A harmless sentiment, my lady. A reminder of our shared history," she finished. "Yes, we share much." She pushed to her feet. The room felt suddenly too small. "I wonder, Lord Baelish, if you recall every word you have spoken in my ear since the day you spirited me from the capital." "I do." The tempo of his smile faltered. Memories can be selective. I keep mine sharp. She turned to Varys. You have the copies? Varys produced a bundle of scrolls bound in crimson ribbon. He unrolled the first, Baelish's hand, signing a missive to Lysa Arryn describing how the lion and the wolf will tear each other's throats while the mockingbird feeds on the carcass. Sansa spoke the lines aloud. Littlefinger's breath hitched. Another scroll, promising marriage to Sansa in exchange for the Knights of the Vale. Another, negotiations with the Boltons before they burned Winterfell. Each word a stepping stone across years of treachery. Baelish rose, palms spread. My lady, context. One must play many sides. One must choose a side. She cut in. You chose your own. He pivoted to Varys. You of all men understand necessity. Varys' expression was a mask of gentle regret. I understand necessity demands sacrifice. Today, it demands truth. The door opened. 2 Kingsguard entered, helms bright beneath torchlight. Brienne moved behind Sansa, silent steel. Petyr's voice lowered to a rasp. Sansa, think. The wars to come, my knowledge, my coin. Your knowledge buys only silence, she said. And I will live in silence no more. Thunderheads gathered over King's Landing by noon. Bells pealed, summoning nobles to the Red Keep's outer courtyard. Rumors raced. The Mockingbird arrested, the Northern Lady demanding justice. Some thought it a farce, others a trap. Rain drummed on cloaks as the crowd pressed against balustrades overlooking the yard where a block of dark weirwood had been set upon a dais. As Sansa stepped into the courtyard's center, the clouds cracked with white fire, illuminating her like prophecy. She felt the weight of thousands of eyes, southern, northern, hungry, fearful. Somewhere above in a window slit, she sensed Cersei watching, amused or outraged, she could not know. Brienne marched beside Petyr, his wrists bound with silver chain. He wore no cloak now, though the rain soaked his doublet. Still, he carried himself with that air of midnight confidence, as though salvation lurked in every shadow. Sansa wondered if he searched for Arya among the faces, half expecting the girl who had slit Lord Walder's throat to emerge. Arya was days away on the King's Road, lured south at Sansa's summons, but Petyr did not know that. He had believed himself the puppeteer, never the puppet. They mounted the dais. Brienne forced him to his knees before the block. Lightning cracked again, thunder rolling after like the war drums of giants. Sansa raised a hand, and the courtyard hushed. She did not shout. Her voice need travel only as far as Petyr's ear, and in the hush it carried to the walls. Petyr Baelish, she said. You betrayed my father to the Lannisters. You sold my hand to the Boltons. You conspired to set house against house and kingdom against kingdom for your own rise. You fed on chaos like a mortal plague. There is no place in any realm for such a monster. He turned, rain streaming off his lashes. I loved your mother. I love you. Everything I did. You did for yourself, she finished, no pity in her gaze. I do not need your love. Silence stretched. Somewhere a raven cried. Then Sansa reached for the sword Brienne offered, Icy's reforged half-Oathkeeper. Valyrian steel glimmered bloody beneath the stormlight. She stepped behind Petyr. He craned his neck upward, lips trembling with pleas that never formed. For a breath, Sansa smelled lemon cakes and fresh-cut winter roses, the child she had been. Then the scent vanished, and only iron remained. The blade fell. Rain hissed against steel. His head dropped, rolling to rest at the edge of the block, eyes wide as if still scheming. Blood pooled, slick and dark as secrets. Thunder boomed a final salute, and the downpour washed the dais clean. Sansa exhaled, a slow surrender of breath she had held since girlhood. In the silence that followed, she felt the cords of an unseen net snap, strand by strand, until she stood free beneath the weeping sky. She lifted her face to the rain, letting it mark her cheeks like ink, and in each cold drop, she tasted the north. Brienne sheathed the sword. Lady Sansa, she murmured, it is done. It has only begun. Sansa's voice shook, not with fear, but with the vastness of what came next. She turned to the gathered lords. The North will not kneel, and neither will I. Her gaze swept the balustrades. Some lowered their eyes, some stared in fearful wonder. In that moment, she knew the story of the Stark girl who survived would spread wider than any lie Littlefinger had ever spun. As the crowd dispersed, she walked alone up the steps toward the throne room. The rain eased, leaving a hush broken only by her measured footfalls. Guards flung open the high doors. The Iron Throne waited at the hall's far end, sharp and indifferent. She did not approach it. Instead, she stood upon the steps below, breathing the candle-thick air. Cersei emerged from a side arch, flanked by Qyburn. "A spectacle," she said, the word curling like smoke. "The yard still reeks of him. Justice seldom smells like perfume." Sansa replied. Cersei descended a step, eyes bright. "You remind me of myself, the day I buried Robert. A queen in all but name." "I am no queen," Sansa said. "Not here. Yet power answers your voice. You executed the greatest spider in my court without asking my leave." Sansa met her gaze unblinking. "A northern wolf asks leave of no lion." Cersei's smile was small but not displeased. "Careful, girl. The lioness bites. The wolf packs," Sansa said, and turned away. In her chambers that night, she unbraided her hair before the mirror polished like moonlit glass. She thought of Arya galloping through rain toward the city, of Jon marshalling wildlings on the wall, of dragons rumored on the wing, of white walkers haunting the snow-gutted forest. She thought of petals dropping from the Winterfell heart tree, the quiet between heartbeats before a blade strikes. All of Westeros stood on a knife's edge, and she had chosen to wield it. Somewhere in the keep, servants would be burning Baelish's papers, Cersei's decree to purge his stain. But Sansa had already secured what she needed. Ledgers tucked in a satchel beneath her bed, secrets to bargain with should lions bare teeth. She drifted to sleep hearing thunder retreat toward the narrow sea, and she dreamt not of snow, nor of blood, but of a bloom of pale blue roses opening under starlight. Morning brought a hush, as if the storm's fury had exhausted the city. Sunlight washed the courtyard where, hours before, blood had pooled. Ravens perched upon the crenellations, feathers drying. Sansa broke her fast with oatcakes and saltcod, the fare of sailors, though she sat beside gilt-edged plates. Brienne delivered news. Baelish's household guard surrendered without quarrel. The small folk whispered of the northern lady who slew a lord with her own hand. Some named her the Red Wolf. Others called her the Silent Queen. All agreed she was no one's captive now. Yet power's vacuum suckled hunger. At midday, a letter arrived from Euron Greyjoy, penned in a woman's ornate hand, fashioned, no doubt, by one of his thralls. He praised her mettle, offered marriage, and boasted of a crown of salt and rock awaiting their shared dominion. Sansa placed the letter in the brazier untouched by flame. It blackened, curled, and vanished. That afternoon, Qyburn requested her presence in the dungeons, an inspection of the dragon skulls. He said, perhaps to entice her with curiosities. She donned fur, took a single lantern, and descended spiral stairs long as legends. The darkness pressed with centuries of hush. Dragon bones rose from the gloom, vast ribs arching overhead like the staves of a cathedral. Beneath Vhagar's yawning skull, Qyburn awaited, smile thin as parchment. "An awe-inspiring lineage," he murmured. "Power decays, yet leaves impressive relics. Relics remind the living of consequences," Sansa said. He bowed, lips pursed. "The Queen wonders whether you intend to remain her guest. Tell her I intend to remain no man's possession." He lifted one brow. "In that case, she hopes you will join her tomorrow in council. War looms, Lady Stark, north and south alike. She believes you may prove indispensable." "None?" Sansa brushed a finger across Vhagar's fang, cool as marble yet keen enough to cut. "Every queen believes herself indispensable," she said. "The realm will decide." Leaving the dungeons, she found the air above smelled sharply of pine resin. Workers had scrubbed the courtyard stones, scrubbed the dais, scrubbed even the block. Yet she saw the faintest rust-brown trace where blood had met rain. She knelt, touched the stone. Cold, unforgiving, and utterly honest. That night she wrote to Jon, recounting all but omitting nothing. Baelish's treason laid bare, his death beneath the storm, Cersei's wary invitation. She sealed the raven feather to the parchment with white wax stamped direwolf. As the bird lifted into the bruised twilight, she stood at the window long after its silhouette vanished, eyes fixed north, though her body remained caged in stone. Hours later, she slept, and in shallow dreams, she walked the godswood of Winterfell. The heart tree whispered with the voice of her mother. Not words but the hush of skirts against snow. Among the roots she saw a mockingbird feather sodden with blood and rain. She knelt, lifted it, and fed it to the dark pool beneath the tree where it sank without ripple. When she woke, dawn stained the sky a tempered steel, and she was ready to sharpen herself against the day. 5 hours after Littlefinger's execution, the Red Keep hummed with cautious respect for the northern wolf who had bared her teeth. In those hours, unseen currents shifted deeper than any could chart, and though the Iron Throne glimmered untaken at the hall's far end, its shadow had already changed form, cast now not by the lion alone, but by a wolf who refused to kneel. On the action, Sansa spent her first full day after the execution walking halls that seemed both intimately familiar and hopelessly strange. The Red Keep's walls had once felt like a labyrinth of shadowy corners and echoing footsteps, where she had drifted half in terror, half in the haze of a girl's naive yearning. Now, as she turned through torchlit corridors, the shape of every archway and every mosaic on the floor stood vivid, each detail illuminated by hindsight. She remembered where courtiers had stood when Joffrey humiliated her, remembered the exact smell of Tywin Lannister's flickering braziers, the scuff of chainmail outside her locked door. But though the memories echoed, fear did not come. What she felt now was an unspoken vigilance, a presence in her own body and mind that steadied her. The day was gray and held an uneasy hush, as if the storm itself had retreated to gather breath. She wore a gown of deep charcoal, soft linen embroidered with subtle vines and silver thread, and a cloak lined in pale fur that brushed the floor. Her hair she braided tightly, pinned with small silver clasps in the shape of wolves' heads. Brienne trailed in her wake at a respectful distance, watchful as a mastiff. Servants bowed as Sansa passed, murmuring courtesies that carried edges of awe. She had taken a life on the dais before the entire court, and in doing so had dared to claim a measure of power that did not hinge on Lannister indulgence. It was not just that she had ended a man's life. Many had done that in King's Landing. It was whose life she had ended, and how. The cunning spider who had spun his webs from the Vale to the Crownlands, undone by a stark girl's judgment. It was the story on every tongue. Her first errand took her down a corridor that opened onto a circular foyer, lined with alcoves holding dusty marble busts. Through an adjoining gallery, a pair of gold cloaks waited, faces carefully blank. They gave her a curt nod and pushed open tall oak doors banded in iron. When she stepped inside, she found a small salon with high windows tinted in green and red glass, letting in tinted shards of morning light. Queen Cersei was already there, seated at a table carved from old weirwood and inlaid with mother of pearl. She wore a close-fitted gown of black brocade, the neckline high, her posture as precise as a statue's. Qyburn stood beside her, his dark sleeves pooling at the wrists, while Sir Gregor stood behind them in the corner, a metal sentinel whose presence tightened the air. Sansa did not bow deeply. She bent her head just enough to honor the custom, but not enough to imply subservience. Cersei's lips curved a fraction, an acknowledgement of the shift in power between them. She gestured for Sansa to sit. Brienne remained by the door. "Good of you to come," Cersei said in a voice meant to be amiable. "I trust you've found your accommodations comfortable. You have a history with these chambers, if I recall." Sansa watched the queen's eyes for any flicker of cruelty. "They suit me well enough," she replied. "I'm grateful for the courtesy extended by your household." Cersei's smile held no warmth. "A courtesy for a time. Much depends on your next steps, Lady Stark. With Lord Baelish's departure, certain opportunities have arisen, but so have certain inconveniences. Qyburn shuffled to the table. Opportunities indeed, your grace. We could easily name them. The Vale's knights are rudderless now that Lord Baelish's chain of command is severed. House Arryn might look to the crown for new guidance. The Lords Declarant always bristled at Baelish's regency, but they have not shown unwavering loyalty to the Iron Throne, either. Nairn? I doubt they would be quick to name a Lannister as regent, Sansa said, gaze unwavering. Nor me, for that matter. The Vale, for all its talk of loyalty to the Starks, has always looked to its own. I doubt thou'd take kindly to any overlord who arrives in the wake of an execution. Cersei lifted a goblet of wine, swirling it. Yet, sometimes, a strong hand is needed, especially in uncertain times. An execution of a man as slippery as Pettier Baelish can be interpreted in many ways. Some see it as a decisive blow against corruption. Others see it as a savage betrayal. She raised her gaze, letting the unspoken question hang. I wonder how you prefer it be interpreted. Sansa folded her hands on her lap. I prefer the truth, that he committed high treason and was judged accordingly. No realm is served by a lord who plays the realm against itself. Cersei studied her as though searching for a hairline crack in porcelain. And in claiming the right to that judgment, do you suppose you strengthen the North, or the crown, or yourself alone? Sansa did not flinch. Any ruler who willfully allows a traitor to thrive sets rot in her own foundations. I ended that rot. The North is threatened by greater dangers than petty cunning. White Walkers, the Winter's Wrath, the vulnerability of a realm divided. We cannot face these if men like Baelish roam free, sowing divisions for their personal gain. Cersei took a slow sip of wine. Indeed. Yet, here we are, still two queens with two separate aims. Your half-brother calls himself king in the North, and you, his sister, remain in Landing. Are we to believe you came all this way simply to chase ghosts? Or do you hope to steer the Iron Throne's might in favor of your brother's war? A hush nestled in the corners of the chamber. Sansa's voice remained calm, and not blind to the precariousness of our alliances. The king in the North believes that if we do not unite, we die. He's lost too many to pretend otherwise. I came to re-establish trust, something that cannot be done so long as men like Baelish lurk, turning hearts with false promises. I did what I had to do. Now, Qyburn spread his fingers in a gesture of neutrality. It is a strong statement, one the city will not soon forget. Sir Gregor's visor reflected the green-tinted light, a silent reminder of intimidation. Cersei set her goblet down, each movement precise. You speak of unity, yet you haven't declared fealty. Perhaps you believe you hold enough power to stand alone. Or perhaps you see yourself as a queen in your own right, despite your brother's crown. I see myself as the daughter of Ned Stark, Sansa replied. Nothing more, and certainly nothing less. An inscrutable pause. Then, Cersei inclined her head, with an air of someone concluding a dull conversation. Very well. We will allow you to remain as an envoy for your brother's cause, and to settle the Vale's matters as you wish. But do not mistake forbearance for weakness, Lady Stark. I have enough to manage with dragons in the east and Greyjoys prowling the sea. Sansa rose. I don't mistake anything, your grace. She offered a faint courtesy of parting, then turned, letting Brienne open the door. She did not glance at Sir Gregor, though his presence pressed on her nerves like a too familiar nightmare. The moment she stepped into the corridor, she felt a looseness in her ribs, as if the tension of holding herself so carefully had cramped her lungs. Brienne leaned close as they walked. Does she threaten you, my lady? Shall we set stricter watch on your doors? She threatens everyone, Sansa murmured. But for now, no, she won't strike openly. She'll watch. She'll wait for me to make a mistake, or to show a vulnerability she can exploit. Her footsteps echoed on the stone. She might wait a long time. The day wore on in a litany of smaller encounters. At midday, Sansa joined a group of lesser lords for a sparse meal in a private hall overlooking the sea. An emissary from the Stormlands whispered queries about the king in the North's willingness to negotiate shipping routes. A half-drunk Frey cousin cornered her with apologies for the Red Wedding, stammering that the new generation of Freys wished no ill, that they were eager to please the North if it meant trade in the twins. Sansa kept her face as impassive as she could, remembering the corpses of her mother and brother in that vile hall. The man's trembling, watery eyes and puffy jowls drew no sympathy from her. She gave him no comfort, only careful courtesy. She excused herself to walk the castle walls. The ramparts overlooked the slate-gray waters of Blackwater Bay, where merchant ships and a handful of war galleys dotted the horizon. The wind whipped at her cloak, tangling her braids. Salt air mingled with the faint stink of old city sewage drifting from the harbor. She found a spot near a merlin and leaned forward, letting the breeze numb her cheeks. She tried to imagine what was happening in Winterfell at that very moment. The ghosts of her home still whispered in her mind. She pictured the courtyard dusted with snow, the hot breath of the direwolves in the kennels, the hush of the godswood. Footsteps approached. She turned to see Varys, cloaked in shimmering layers of pale gray, his hands tucked in voluminous sleeves. He offered a soft, obsequious smile. "My lady, might I join you in your reverie?" Sansa regarded him warily. "If you wish." He glided to her side, resting his elbows on the stone. For a moment, neither spoke, and the wind rustled the cloth of his sleeves. Then he said, "You have set quite the precedent. Petyr Baelish was once my rival, though he liked to pretend we were equals in cunning. His absence creates a vacuum." He paused to watch a hawk dip below the parapet in search of prey. "Some fear you intend to fill that vacuum with northern ambitions." Sansa's voice was low. "I'm not Petyr Baelish. He thrived on sowing conflict. I want to spare my people more heartbreak." "Indeed," Varys said. "Yet hearts can be heartbreak's architects. I have seen the best of intentions unravel in the pursuit of safety." His eyes shone with a gentle curiosity. "Forgive me. I do not doubt your sincerity, Lady Sansa. I only wonder if you realize how heavily the crown weighs, even on those who do not wear it." Sansa watched him, trying to decide if he tested or merely observed. "I've had enough illusions stripped from me to know that any influence, any power, demands a price. Then you are wiser than most who come here seeking the throne's favor. If you survive these intrigues with your head intact and your heart unbroken, you'll have defied the city's tradition." He said it with that intangible quality of his, a blend of resignation and faint hope. "I am but a servant of the realm. If you truly serve the realm's greater good, I suspect we might yet find ourselves allied. If that day comes, Lord Varys, I will remember your willingness to help me expose Baelish's treasons. For now, I serve the North and the realm at large if it must unify." Varys inclined his head. "And thus do you make your intentions plain? For your sake, I hope Cersei believes you." With that, he withdrew, footsteps soft on the stone, as though he were part ghost. Sansa closed her eyes against the glare of daylight on the bay. She felt an ache of longing for her mother, for her father, for those who might have guided her in these precarious negotiations. But she had only her own counsel now, gleaned from years of forced learning under cruel masters. There was no room for childish illusions. She had to think clearly, anticipate each threat, each manipulation. That evening, a letter arrived for her in the same cramped scrawl she remembered from the old master of arms at Winterfell, Sir Roderick's script, though by another's hand now. It carried news of Winterfell's daily life, the harvest stores, the watchers on the battlements, the efforts to train new recruits. Jon was at the wall, consulting with the Night's Watch, leaving Davos at Winterfell to handle matters. The letter mentioned the approach of Arya, who traveled as swiftly as she could, possibly only a few days behind the Raven's flight. Sansa felt a flutter in her chest at the thought of Arya, the sister she had parted ways with so many years ago, the sister who had reappeared in Winterfell like a wraith of vengeance, the sister who had once been so different from her in every way. Now, they understood one another, in ways that transcended their childhood quarrels. Sansa penned her response by candlelight, detailing the precarious alliances here, warning that King's Landing was never safe, but offering the measure of hope that the alliances might hold, if carefully nurtured. She sealed it with the direwolf sigil and dispatched it. Then she sank onto a window seat, letting her gaze drift across the dark courtyard. Torches flickered below, creating pools of amber in the gloom. The block where Baelish had knelt was gone, replaced by a gap in the board. Even so, she imagined she still saw the dark stain from which no scrubbing could fully cleanse the grain. Justice seldom washed away easily, she reflected. Nor did memories. A knock on her door roused her from that reflection. She expected Brienne or a handmaiden, but instead the door opened to reveal Jaime Lannister. He wore no cloak, only a simple tunic in deep crimson, and his boots were damp as though from a long walk in the yard. An expression hovered on his face that was neither hostility nor courtesy, something more complicated. "My lady," he said stiffly. "Might I have a word?" She hesitated, then beckoned him in. Brienne hovered in the corridor, uncertain. But Sansa met her gaze and gave a single nod. Jaime stepped into the room, letting the door close behind him with a quiet thud. He stood awkwardly for a moment, glancing at her bed, her few possessions. The corner of his mouth twisted. She recalled that once, a lifetime ago, she had admired him for his knightly bearing, for the gallantry she had read about in songs. That admiration had died with her illusions about the Lannisters. But still, she felt a prickle of curiosity. "Do you need something, Sir Jaime?" He hesitated, then cleared his throat. "I've spoken with my sister, our queen, regarding your dramatic gesture. I suspect you know she's weighing her options. She does not relish other powers in her city passing executionary judgments without her express approval." "Indeshwal. I'm aware," Sansa said coolly. His green eyes flicked to her, as though assessing her in a new light. "You remind me of Caitlin in some ways." At that, Sansa went still. Her mother's name on his tongue felt like a chill wind. "Perhaps you remember her the way you wish," she said after a short pause. "She is gone, and the wars go on." Jaime's jaw tightened slightly. "I recall her as a fierce woman, unwavering in her desire to protect her children. You have that same steel, I think. We are no longer pawns on a board set by others, Lady Sansa. Our decisions now shape the realm." She thought about it. "You mention a board. For years that was all Petyr Baelish saw, pieces to move. He's gone now, though he was hardly the only one. Is that your intention? To see me as a piece in your sister's game?" His half-smile was wry, haunted by regrets. "My sister's intentions are her own. I've grown too tired to keep up with them. But I do want to say this. If you truly believe unity is our only hope against the threat in the north, the White Walkers, then perhaps you should consider forging more direct ties with the crown. Perhaps you or your brother would come to an agreement with my sister. A marriage pact, an alliance, anything that could bind us in common cause. For all your caution, the dead will not wait forever." "No." Sansa felt her breath catch at the thought of bending to that extent. "Marry a Lannister?" she said, nearly scoffing. "You tried to kill my brother Bran, pushed him from a tower, so the story goes. And your sister orchestrated half the torment my father and I endured. What sort of alliance would that be?" A flicker of shame passed over Jaime's face. "I know the crimes I'm accused of, and I know they cannot be undone. But I also know that you, Lady Stark, have learned what it means to survive. My sister has too in her way. If the Night King marches, we need every living soul. I'm not saying it can happen easily, or that it should happen at all. I only say that if we do not stand together in some fashion, the living lose." The mention of the Night King and the living's doom carried an undeniable weight, so Sansa did not immediately dismiss it. "I'll consider what is best for my people," she finally said. "That is all I can promise." Jaime studied her. "In better times that might be enough, but these aren't better times." He exhaled. "Regardless, I have said what I came to say. The hour grows late. Good night, my lady." He gave her a curt bow and made to leave. At the threshold, he paused. "It never should have come to all this," he said, so quietly she almost did not catch it. Then he was gone, the door latching behind him. Sansa sat there, her heart a drum in her chest. The cruelty of the Lannisters, the devastation they had brought upon her family, would she truly dare ally with them now? Yet the White Walkers were not a rumor or a fable, not any longer. That threat loomed more terrible than any petty war. She had to hold two truths in her mind: that the Lannisters, and especially Cersei, were dangerous, and that the living might depend on a unified front. Jon would remind her that every hand was needed, though she doubted he would ever stoop to kneel before a Lannister. She rubbed her temples, feeling the tension. She was not a child anymore. She would not be forced. But she had to consider possibilities she once would have spat at. The next day arrived with stinging cold that seeped even through the Red Keep's thick walls. Servants bustled about lighting fires in every brazier. In the courtyard, Sansa watched from a walkway above as guards changed shifts. Two men she recognized from Baelish's retinue in the Vale were being marched off toward the City Watch barracks. Likely they'd be interrogated, or forced to choose new loyalties. How quickly alliances shifted, now that Baelish was no longer there to pay them in coin or blackmail them with secrets. She wondered if any tears would be shed for him. She doubted it. By midday, she had another audience with Cersei, this time in the presence of Lord Varys, Qyburn, and a handful of lesser courtiers. The setting was the same throne room that had haunted Sansa's memories for years, with its soaring pillars and that monstrous seat of swords rearing at the far end. Cersei did not sit upon the Iron Throne today. She stood before it, arms folded, posture regal. Varys hovered to the side, his expression quietly attentive. Cersei began with pleasantries that felt more like sharpened jabs. She inquired after the North's food stores, the morale of its people, and whether Sansa had truly come to treat or to defy. Sansa, for her part, answered with a measured composure, never offering more detail than necessary. She let slip that the North was strengthening its alliances with the free folk beyond the Wall. She let slip that winter storms threatened the Neck, possibly cutting off overland supply routes. She portrayed a North on the brink, yet resolute, hoping that might spur the Crown's sense of urgency. Cersei listened, eyes glittering. "My dear lady," she said after a pointed lull, "though your news from the North is enlightening, I would remind you that my war chest is near depleted from the last conflicts. My willingness to feed the North or protect it from White Walkers depends on what the North can offer in return. Will your brother, the king, open his gates to the Crown's banners? Will he acknowledge my dominion, or at the very least, will he refrain from calling himself a king?" Sansa glanced at Varys, reading only mild curiosity. She looked back at Cersei. "My brother holds his title by the acclamation of the Northern Lords. It is not his alone to relinquish, so he will remain a rebel," Cersei said, her tone cool. "We have a fragile moment of truce at present, Lady Stark, but make no mistake, if your brother's forces do not cooperate, I might consider the North an enemy." She glanced at Qyburn. "A pity, given the severity of the threat you claim. Enemies seldom enjoy the Crown's military aid." Sansa held her breath, refusing to look away. Threatening the North with the Crown's wrath at a time like this will serve no one. If we cannot stand together, we all fall. Surely you must see that. "Nemail." Cersei's lips thinned. "I see that you want everything for nothing, a united realm without any cost to your precious northern pride. But I have seen how pride can cost everything. The Crown extends an open hand. If the North kneels. If it does not, then we have little more to discuss." A hush. Sansa's heart hammered. She could feel the stares of the courtiers, the weight of centuries of enmity between North and South pressing down on her shoulders. She remembered Jon's beliefs, the absolute sincerity in his voice, when he said they must all unite or die. Would he kneel to Cersei? He had knelt to Daenerys Targaryen once, if the rumors from Dragonstone were to be believed. But Daenerys was at least an ally he trusted to fight the Night King. Cersei was far from trustworthy. Still, she fought not to show her uncertainty. "I will take your proposal to my brother," she said, each word carefully measured. "He may decide differently than you imagine." Cersei studied her, clearly trying to read the real truth. "So be it. You will pen your raven and dispatch it today. I expect an answer before the next moon's turn. Otherwise, I might have to consider more drastic measures." She gave Sansa a thin smile. "And I doubt you wish to endure yet another imprisonment here, do you?" Sansa's stomach clenched. but she kept her voice steady. "No, your grace. I do not." "Then do not test my patience." With that, Cersei gestured dismissal. Courtiers moved aside, and the brief meeting ended, tension snapping in the air like a whip. Sansa left the throne room in a swirl of conflicting emotions. She found Brienne waiting outside with her hand on her sword hilt. The tall woman's blue eyes flicked over Sansa's face. "Are you all right?" Sansa nodded, though she felt a tremor in her belly. "Let's go," she murmured. She headed for her chambers, mind racing. What would Jon do if she told him Cersei demanded his fealty? Would he see it as a necessary compromise or an intolerable humiliation? The king in the north who swore no oaths to the woman who had orchestrated so much suffering in the realm. How could that stand? As she walked, she spotted a flicker of movement near the columned walkway. Arya. Her sister stood there, dressed in worn leathers, cloak askew, dust from the road still clinging to her boots. When she caught Sansa's eye, she broke into a half-smile that was all edges. Sansa felt relief wash over her. She hurried forward, arms outstretched. Arya stiffened at the embrace for a heartbeat, then relaxed, hugging her sister in return. "You're here," Sansa breathed, voice trembling. "I didn't think you'd arrive so soon." Arya pulled back, scanning her face as though searching for bruises. "I rode through the night. It seems you've been busy executing the untrustworthy." Sansa's smile was faint. It had to be done. "I'm glad you're here." Arya's eyes darkened with quiet satisfaction. "He deserved worse, but I suppose a quick end will do." She glanced around, taking in the finery of the corridor, and the watchful glances of passing servants. "I hate this place. Always have." Sansa nodded. "I know. It's more dangerous than ever, now that Cersei's fixed on testing my loyalty. Let's not linger here in public. Come on." Name Tumal. They made their way to Sansa's chambers, Brienne following discreetly. Once inside, Sansa offered Arya a seat by the hearth where a small fire crackled. Arya tossed off her cloak and sank down, eyes flicking about. Restless as a caged cat, Sansa noticed the fine lines of tension around Arya's mouth. Even in their fleeting time together at Winterfell, she had seen how deeply her sister had changed. Silent, lethal, burdened with secrets. She also felt the abiding bond that survived time and hardship. "What news from Winterfell?" Sansa asked softly, pouring watered wine for them both. "I received letters, but I'd rather hear it from you." Arya took the cup, not drinking yet. "Jon's gone to the wall to confer with the Night's Watch. The wildlings hold the territories around the gift. Davos is at Winterfell, doing his best to keep the peace among the lords. The snows are thick, and the days are short, but the harvest was better than expected." A flicker of frustration crossed Arya's face. "Everyone's anxious, though. They feel the threat in the air. Nobody truly knows what's coming." Sansa nodded, biting her lip. "Cersei demands that Jon kneel, or she'll withhold any southern support against the dead. If he refuses, she may consider the North a rebel threat and turn her armies on us instead of focusing on the real enemy." Arya let out a derisive huff. "Let her come. The Lannisters have never fared well in the cold. She might come with the Golden Company or with Euron Greyjoy's fleet," Sansa said, voice tight. "Don't underestimate the lengths to which she'll go. If she attacks the North while the Night King marches, we'll be fighting a war on two fronts. We can't afford that." Arya's jaw tightened. "Jon won't kneel to her. He bent the knee once to the Dragon Queen because he believed she'd help against the Night King. Cersei's no Dragon Queen. She's a venomous spider spinning a brittle web." "Exactly," Sansa said, pressing her hands together. "We're caught unless we can convince her there's a larger threat." She's seen proof of whites before. Jon brought one south once, though that ended poorly. She swore to help, but then withdrew. If the tales are correct. Arya tilted her head. "So we show her again? Bring her a fresh white? She'll claim it's a trick. Or maybe kill whoever brings it." "Better mine." Sansa exhaled. "We must find a way to keep her from attacking us. Possibly we stall her. I can't see Jon yielding to her. Nor would the lords of the North. But if we can buy time, at least, we can focus our strength on the Night King." Arya eyed her sister. How do you plan to stall Cersei Lannister? Another bit of cunning? She might see right through it. Sansa's lips thinned. I'll have to use every skill I learned from Baelish. Ironic as that is. He taught me how to spin illusions and bide my time. I'll feed her just enough hope to keep her from striking. Meanwhile, we must gather allies. Perhaps House Tyrell's remnants, or the Tully forces. If Edmure can muster something from River Run, or if the Vale remains loyal to us, we might hold the neck of the continent. And now, Arya's grin was grim. I'll talk with the Lords of the Vale, if need be. Robin Arryn is a fool, but he liked you well enough. He might listen. They conferred in hushed tones as the fire crackled, discussing routes, potential allies, rumored movements of Daenerys Targaryen's forces in the east, and the uncertain loyalties of Dorne. Hours slipped away. Sansa felt a faint pulse of hope. At least, she was not alone now. She had Arya's cunning and Brienne's sword at her side, and behind them, they had the unstoppable grit of the North. That evening, a small feast was held in the Great Hall to welcome some merchant princes from Pentos. Sansa attended out of obligation, wearing a modest gown, and sitting at a lesser table so as not to draw too much attention. She observed how Cersei played the gracious hostess to the foreigners, lavish with compliments and suggestions for trade deals. She noted the presence of Euron Greyjoy, newly arrived in the city, boasting in a loud voice about his triumphs at sea. The man's swagger made Sansa's skin crawl, especially when his gaze flicked toward her with ill-hidden arrogance. She sipped her wine sparingly, answering any greetings with polite brevity. Arya, in her worn clothes, stood near a column, arms crossed, scanning the throng with hooded eyes. Several times Sansa caught her sister glaring at Euron, as if measuring him for a kill. Sansa gently shook her head, cautioning restraint. Arya's scowl deepened, but she did not move. Midway through the feast, Euron cornered Sansa as she rose from her seat to take some air. He swept into a deep bow, though he smirked as he did so. "The famed Lady of Winterfell," he drawled, voice pitched to Carrie. "I hear you parted a man's head from his shoulders not days ago. My, but that does tingle the blood." "Wow." Sansa forced a small smile, though her stomach tightened. "Lord Greyjoy, I trust your voyages have been profitable. As profitable as a plunderer can hope. But I do so tire of the mundane, and I find myself enthralled by remarkable women. Queen Cersei, for instance, or you. A pity you're not in the market for a new husband. You might enjoy the Salt Throne, if you can stomach the seas brine." She fixed him with a chilly stare. The last Greyjoy who threatened the North paid dearly for his folly. "Ask Theon." None torned. His grin revealed a glint of gold in his teeth. "Theon is no measure of a true Ironborn. But let's not spoil the night with talk of traitors. Perhaps Lady Stark, you will dance with me if I promise not to step on your pretty northern toes." Sansa's patience wore thin. "I'll decline, if it pleases you." She stepped around him, turning away so he would see only the sweep of her cloak, an unmistakable dismissal. Euron let out a low chuckle. "As you wish. But be sure to come calling should you want a taste of real adventure." He sauntered off, whistling under his breath. Sansa closed her eyes briefly, counting heartbeats until she felt her composure return. This city was thick with suitors and enemies, and often they wore the same face. She found Arya near the column, who'd watched the entire exchange. Arya looked ready to carve Euron's heart from his chest. "That one's a vile cut of fish," Arya muttered. Sansa nodded. "He's dangerous, but we'll deal with him if we must. Let's not stir more trouble tonight. Cersei is watching." Arya glanced toward the dais where Cersei sat, feigning interest in the Pentoshi merchant's flamboyant gestures. "One day, it will come to a reckoning." "I can smell it," Sansa quietly agreed. The sisters withdrew from the hall soon after, leaving the clamor of music and laughter behind. Back in Sansa's chambers, they spoke in lower voices, away from prying ears. Arya described her encounters on the road. Inns full of refugees from the Riverlands, men who had lost homes to roving bandits, peasants who had starved through the harsh winter. None of them had illusions that the realm was stable. The entire kingdom was a tinderbox, waiting for a spark. Sansa found a scrap of parchment and began drafting possible lines of correspondence. To House Tully at Riverrun, to any loyal Arryn bannermen in the Vale who might align with the Starks, and even to Dorne's southern lords who might want revenge against the Lannisters. She would try every angle. She had to. She could not simply bow her head to Cersei's threats and abandon Jon's stance. Nor could she incite a new war while the dead threatened. It was a narrow ledge she walked, and any misstep would send her and the North plummeting. In the following days, Sansa's position in the Red keeps solidified in a curious way. She was both unwelcome and indispensable. Cersei made a display of ignoring her in public, focusing on foreign guests and matters of trade or extortion. But behind closed doors, she summoned Sansa or demanded updates on the North's response. Qyburn occasionally cornered her in corridors, gently pressing for any sign that the North might bend, or at least might offer men to the Crown's wars. Varys offered quiet counsel in the shadows, cautioning Sansa not to let Cersei isolate her or provoke her into open defiance. Brienne never left her side, standing sentinel at every negotiation. Arya moved through the keep like a stray cat, listening, watching, drifting among servants and guards, gleaning secrets. Sometimes she vanished for hours, returning with cryptic remarks about which secret passages lay unguarded, or which men whispered of rebellion. One dusk, as the sun cast a bloody glow over the rooftops, Sansa and Arya stood by a narrow window slit, passing a skin of watered wine between them. Sansa's eyes were drawn to the yard below, where torches were being lit, forming a pattern of flickering points. "You were always better at being brave," Sansa said, a small note of nostalgia in her voice. "When I was small, I used to wish I had your spirit. I always believed in songs and stories, never suspecting how cruel the real world could be." Arya shrugged, though there was a tightness in her expression. "Bravery is just not feeling you have another choice. I did what I had to do to survive, just like you. We both learned from different teachers." They shared a moment of fragile understanding. Then, Arya's posture shifted. "I've seen men in Lannister Red meeting with Sellswords by the old stables near Street of Silk. Might be nothing, might be plans for a quiet purge of any uncertain elements. I overheard rumors that some among the City Watch question their loyalty." "Times are tense." Sansa's mind churned. Cersei may be consolidating power. She hates half measures. If she thinks the City Watch wavers in loyalty, she'll replace the officers with men devoted to her. That's one step toward shutting out any influence from us or from outside the city. And Arya tilted her head. "We could spread a rumor among the Watch that Cersei plots to raise foreign sellswords above them, to pay them less than the gold cloaks. That might sow doubt. Then, if the Watch is uncertain, they might not act as quickly when she demands they clamp down on us." Sansa regarded her sister thoughtfully. "That's cunning. Petyr Baelish would approve." Arya's eyes narrowed. "I'm not him. I'm only using the weapons we have. Deceit might be foul, but I learned it's sometimes necessary. Baelish used cunning to climb. We can use cunning to survive." "Namond." Sansa looked away, the memory of Baelish's final moments surfacing in her mind. "Yes," she said quietly. "We can." They spent an hour refining the scheme, deciding which servants might overhear the right rumors. Sansa felt a twist in her gut. She hated resorting to manipulations, but the city was a pit of snakes, and they had to walk carefully among them. Once they decided on an approach, they parted ways. Arya to speak to a stable hand who might pass the word cleverly. Sansa to attend a brief meeting with Qyburn about supply chains for the winter. That night, lying in the heavy four-poster bed that still smelled faintly of dust and lavender sachets, Sansa thought she might never truly sleep again. She drifted in and out of half-dreams where faceless shapes tugged at her cloak, where the Iron Throne melted into a monstrous wolf's jaws, and where Baelish's severed head whispered that she was now wearing his mantle. But eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and the darkness of dreamless rest followed. At the next dawn, a flurry of horns blared from the city gate. Sansa rose, half-dressed, to peer out her window. Down below, banners were approaching. For a moment, panic threaded her. Had Jon arrived unexpectedly? No. The banners were golden with a red heart in the center. The sigil of House Redwine, perhaps. Mariners from the Reach. Men in green and gold livery rode behind them. Sansa recognized some sign of Tyrell vassals, though the Tyrells themselves were all but extinguished. These were surely leftover forces from the Reach, newly arrived to treat with Cersei or secure their positions. She finished dressing with the help of a maid and stepped out to the corridor. Arya was already awake, leaning against the wall, having apparently returned from some scouting. Brienne awaited them as well. A stable boy came rushing up to Sansa with a sealed parchment. She opened it to see that Cersei summoned her to greet the newly arrived forces from the Reach. A forced courtesy, but also a show of the Crown's alliances. Sansa sighed. Another performance under watchful eyes. Within the hour, Sansa, accompanied by Brienne, stood in the courtyard as the visitors dismounted. Cersei arrived in her black gown, Qyburn and the mountain trailing in her wake. The guests bowed, presenting their credentials. Lord Tarley's cousin among them, along with a Redwine captain who boasted of controlling a fleet that could keep the Narrow Sea free of pirates if the Crown would subsidize. Sansa recognized the maneuver for what it was. Another attempt at forging alliances that might be used against Daenerys or any other foe. All the while, the visitors' eyes drifted to Sansa, the famed Lady of Winterfell who had dispatched Littlefinger. She offered them the barest courtesy, mindful of how Cersei watched her. She felt as though every syllable she uttered could be twisted, every gesture dissected. Lord Tarley's cousin, a stiff-backed man with a bristly mustache, eventually turned to Sansa and asked with gruff politeness how the harvest fared in the north. She gave a vague response and accepted his compliments with a tight smile, though she could feel the tension humming in the air. Cersei addressed them all. "You arrive at a propitious time, my lords. King's Landing stands at a crossroads, with foreign pretenders eyeing our shores. We rely upon the loyalty of great houses to ensure stability. Lord Redwyn, your father once pledged men to secure the city from would-be usurpers. I trust you will uphold that tradition. I trust you will uphold that tradition." The Redwine man bowed. "Oh, of course, your grace. Though we have endured losses, we remain unwavering in our devotion to the Crown. Yet we hear troubling rumors about alliances forming in the north, or across the sea. We wish to be on the side that best preserves order." "Me?" Cersei's smile was as brittle as winter grass. "Order is precisely what we offer. Our dear Lady Stark is here to ensure the North does not do anything rash. Isn't that right?" She glanced at Sansa, voice dripping with challenge. Sansa let only a measured pause pass. "I am here to see that we face the real threat. The Night King and his army. The North has no intention of rash action. Unless provoked." She let that last phrase hang just long enough. She saw a flash of annoyance in Cersei's eyes. The tension was broken by Qyburn's smooth interjection about supply lines, and the conversation veered toward logistics. While the men discussed provisions, Sansa stood back, her gaze flicking over the new arrivals. She recognized the subtle hunger in some of them. They wanted lands, titles, or gold that might be gleaned from a fragile monarchy. If Cersei fell, they'd pivot to the next power. The game continued, unabated by the arrival of the long night. By evening, they were all invited to a banquet of welcome in the Queen's ballroom. Musicians played softly. The smell of roasted quail and cinnamon drifted through the chamber, and men in half-armor clinked goblets while trading subdued jests. Sansa sat near Arya, who had donned a dress of dark blue that looked ill-fitting, as if it were meant for another lady's shape. Her sister visibly chafed at the garment, but wore it to pass as an unassuming court attendee rather than a lethal assassin. They ate little, feigning small appetites. Cersei sipped wine at the high table, regaling the new arrivals with tales of how she repelled Daenerys Targaryen's forces. Euron Greyjoy hovered behind her, an unwanted specter, occasionally throwing in a boast about his ships. Now and then, Cersei cast a glance in Sansa's direction, as if to remind her, "I hold you on a leash." Sansa forced her expression to remain neutral. She would not rattle the leash with defiance. Not yet. At one point, Lord Redwyn's nephew approached and bowed. He was a tall, earnest-looking youth who apologized if he was intruding, then asked Sansa politely for a dance. Sansa, startled, glanced at Arya, who shrugged. With a composed nod, she rose, if only to avoid rudeness. They stepped onto the floor where couples circled in stately measures, accompanied by the harps and flutes that lulled the air into gentility. The young man tried to make conversation, the climate in the north, the details of Winterfell, the furs that might be traded. Sansa answered curtly, her mind elsewhere. She felt eyes upon her from every corner. Cersei's, Euron's, even Jaime's from across the room. She recalled the last time she had danced here, so many years ago with the Tyrell's courtesy. Then, she had been a trembling girl, desperate for kindness. Now she felt like a seasoned traveler crossing a ravine on a thin rope, hyper-aware of every step. When the dance ended, she excused herself. The hall's energy was too stifling, the candlelight seeming to flicker with false cheer. She slipped out, ignoring the calls of courtiers who might demand conversation. Arya followed discreetly, and together they found the corridor leading toward the royal gardens. The night sky was clear for once, stars glinting like shards of ice, the air cold enough that their breath fogged. They strolled a path of gravel bordered by trimmed hedges. Arya exhaled. I was ready to stab the next man who offered me a dance, she said in a low voice. I hate these southern games. Sansa let out a quiet laugh that held no real mirth. They're all games, no matter where we are. At least in the north, the threats are more straightforward. Storms, hunger, the undead. Here, the threat is every man's ambition. They paused by a marble bench. Arya glanced around to ensure no one lingered among the sculpted shrubs. Then she turned to Sansa. Has Cersei demanded an answer from Jon yet? She has. I wrote him. I can't imagine he'll agree to kneel, but maybe he can offer a compromise. I fear that might not suffice. She hungers for absolute submission. Arya curled her lip. Then we must prepare for betrayal. Cersei will never let another queen or king flourish if she can crush them. Sansa folded her arms, rubbing her hands against the chill. I know. I'm trying to buy time, that's all. When the snows melt enough that the armies can march, I suspect we'll see the shape of her plans. Until then, we need to find allies who won't be swayed by her gold or her threats. Arya nodded. And if it comes to a fight in King's Landing? Sansa stiffened. I'd rather avoid that. Too many innocents would suffer. But if she corners us... She stopped, pressing her lips together. The memory of Baelish's severed head flitted behind her eyelids. I won't hesitate anymore. The time for meekness is over. Arya's smile was a feral little curl. That's the sister I remember. They lingered in the garden until the cold grew biting. Then they slipped back inside. The night ended quietly, without an open confrontation. But Sansa sensed a storm building in the undercurrents. Cersei would not rest until she had forced a choice, and time was running short. Morning arrived with a swirl of new developments. A raven from the wall brought dire news. Stray whites had been sighted near Eastwatch. Scattered scouts of the night, King's army. The watch was fortifying, but they feared this was only the first wave. Jon, the letter said, was gathering what forces he could from the wildlings to push them back. The war in the north had begun, in earnest. Sansa's breath shuddered as she read the lines again. So soon. She hurried to Arya, who read the letter in stony silence. They locked gazes, dread passing between them. Once the dead truly marched, all else was secondary. That was the truth they had tried to impress upon the southern lords, but few truly believed it. They went to find Cersei, determined to press the matter. If the White Walkers broke through the wall, no southern fortress would remain safe. But an hour's search revealed that the queen was cloistered in her private solar with Euron Greyjoy, and refused to see them. They tried appealing to Qyburn, who merely apologized in his soft, insidious tone, explaining that her grace was quite occupied. Frustrated, Sansa scrawled another message to Jon, urging him to send an emissary or any visible proof that might convince the southern houses to stand with them. She sealed the letter and gave it to a courier with instructions to ride swiftly north along the King's Road, bypassing normal messenger services. With ravens possibly intercepted or delayed, she wanted at least one human messenger who could confirm the urgency. The day dragged on. Sansa felt like she was fighting against a tide that refused to recede, stuck in the heart of a city more fixated on petty power plays than on the existential threat. She found herself in the small library near Maegor's Holdfast, scanning old tomes for any mention of the last long night, trying to glean some tidbit that might sway the ignorant. Arya paced behind her, occasionally peeking out the narrow windows for watchers. At length, footsteps approached. Varys gliding in, expression tinged with concern. He gave a slight bow. "My lady, forgive the intrusion, but I bring news that may be of interest to you." "Nerion." Sansa set the book aside. "Speak, my lord, Atat." Varys lowered his voice. "Word is that the Queen has summoned a war council for tomorrow's first light, to discuss the next steps in subduing rebellious houses and forging alliances. The council is to include the Redwyne men, Tarly's cousin, and Euron Greyjoy. I suspect she means to finalize plans that will shape the fate of this city. If you wish a say, you must insist on a place at that council. If you are excluded, the decisions will be made without any northern perspective." "No." Sansa's pulse quickened. "She hasn't informed me. Likely she planned to keep me out, so I'd only learn after the fact." Varys inclined his head, sympathy in his eyes. "Yes. I suggest you make your presence felt. The lords might speak more freely if you are there, or they might attempt to bully you into concessions. But it is better than no seat at the table." Arya's hand fell to the hilt of her dagger. "Let them try to bully her. I'll cut out the first tongue that does." Varys gave a nervous laugh. "Violence will not earn you many friends, dear girl, but I admire your devotion." Sansa closed the tome and rose. "I'll attend. One way or another, I'll force them to acknowledge me. This is too important." Varys smiled thinly, as if relieved. "Then I wish you luck. If the crown chooses war instead of alliance, it could be the city's doom." When he left, Arya met Sansa's gaze. "We'll do what we must. But be careful. If Cersei is cornered, she might do something rash. You've seen what she did at the Sept of Baelor." "Endo." Sansa nodded, remembering the stories of wildfire and the city's trembling. "I know, but I can't let her shape the realm's fate unchallenged." They spent the evening preparing for the council. Sansa wrote notes, bracing herself for every possible argument. She arranged for Brienne to accompany her, though she knew the presence of a warrior might provoke Cersei. A quiet voice in her mind asked if she was walking into a trap, but she banished the thought. She had no choice but to stand firm. Too much was at stake. That night she paced her room, the wind outside rattling the shutters. The city seemed to hold its breath. She felt it in the streets when she peered from her window. Fewer torches, fewer people, as if a hush of dread had fallen. Perhaps the small folk sensed that something loomed, a crisis of leadership, or some shift in the winds of power. She knelt by her bed, not exactly praying, but letting her mind quiet. Memories of her mother's presence in the Godswood filled her. She wished she had that presence now. But she was alone, the last daughter of Ned and Catelyn in King's Landing, braced for a new storm. Eventually, fatigue overcame her. She slept in starts, shallow and tense. Before dawn's first light, she rose, letting a maid help her dress in a high-collared gown of dark gray velvet, embroidered with a subtle pattern of direwolf silhouettes. She bound her hair in a single braid, pinned at the crown in a loop so it wouldn't sway or catch on anything. She had learned that movement must be carefully controlled in these halls. Nothing left to chance. A single slash of silver chain circled her waist, reminiscent of the silver ringmail she'd once seen Robb wear in simpler days. Brienne and Arya waited in the corridor. Together, the three women made their way to the council chamber. Guards flanked the entrance. Sansa lifted her chin, indicating they should move aside. One guard hesitated, apparently uncertain if she was admitted. But Arya's stare and Brienne's imposing height cowed him into stepping aside. They pushed open the door. Inside, Cersei sat at the head of a polished oak table, Euron Greyjoy at her right, Tarly's cousin on her left, and the Redwyne delegate spaced around. Qyburn hovered by the fireplace. Jaime was there too, arms folded over a gleaming breastplate, eyes flicking toward Sansa when she entered. Everyone looked up at once. She could feel the tension coil in the air. See Cersei's lips compress with displeasure. "Lady Stark," Cersei said, voice clipped, "I do not recall sending you an invitation." Sansa stepped forward calmly. "Discussions of war and alliances affect the North as much as any other region. If you intend to talk of rebellion or the realm's defense, we have a stake in it." Euron smirked, leaning back in his chair with boots half propped on the table's edge. "The lady has grown bold." Jaime flicked him a warning glance, but said nothing. Tarly's cousin cleared his throat, uncertain. The red wine men exchanged looks. Cersei exhaled. "Very well. If you wish to bear witness, stand there. But do not interrupt." Sansa inclined her head, though she stood near the corner with Arya and Brienne at her back. She refused to let them push her aside. The conversation resumed, or rather, continued with an undercurrent of unspoken tension. Lord Redwine pressed for a naval alliance to secure shipping lanes from pirates and blockade any Targaryen forces that might approach. Tarly's cousin spoke of the need to quell pockets of resistance in the Reach, especially bandits who declared themselves loyal to a rumored Targaryen infiltration. Euron boasted that his Iron Fleet could do the job if the price was right, and if Cersei gave him certain privileges in the city. Cersei listened, occasionally interjecting with pointed remarks about the necessity of stamping out any sign of disloyalty. Sansa watched and heard the shape of the conversation. The plan was to strengthen King's Landing by controlling the seas and punishing rebellious territories. Nothing was said of the White Walkers, nothing of the North's plight. Not until Jaime cleared his throat and ventured, "And what of the threat beyond the wall?" Cersei shot him a glare. "We've wasted too many resources on that nonsense already. If Lady Stark wishes to prattle about her undead, let her. But we have real wars to fight here." "Not her." Sansa's mouth went dry. She felt a surge of fury, but forced her voice to remain even. "The threat is real, and your refusal to acknowledge it will doom us all. My brother has already encountered whites near Eastwatch. The undead approach." Tarly's cousin scowled. "My father served in campaigns all over the Seven Kingdoms. He never saw an undead army." "That was then," Sansa snapped, her composure slipping. "This is now. The dead rise in the north, an endless horde. If we do not unite, they will sweep down the continent like a plague. You can build the greatest navy or the strongest walls. None of it will matter if Winter's army engulfs us." Euron gave a barking laugh. "A pretty story to scare children. If they come, I'll sail away and let them freeze on the beaches." Jaime frowned at him. "And who will you trade with when the entire continent lies under ice? Your gold won't buy you safety from the cold." Cersei rapped the table. "Enough. I did not call this council to debate myths. We have a realm to secure. The Iron Bank demands repayment. The Lords demand stability. And I have no intention of letting rebels in the north or the Reach undermine my reign." "Nah." Sansa stepped forward again, heart pounding. "Your Grace, if you will not heed the threat, at least do not divert your armies north to harass us. You may force the north to retaliate, leaving both sides weakened for the coming storm. Let us call a truce. No demands for fealty, no armed aggression, until we have proof of the Night King's defeat, or until we can unite to face him." "Until we can unite to face him!" Cersei's gaze was frosty. "A truce that benefits you alone. The moment I lower my guard, the Targaryens or the North could strike." "No, Lady Stark. You think me a fool? The only path to peace is the North's capitulation. Bend the knee and we will consider dispatching an army north to aid you. When it suits us." "Memodirassim." Arya bristled, her hand on her dagger. Sansa swallowed hard. She could sense the lines being drawn. If she pressed, Cersei might brand her an open traitor. If she remained silent, the North would face the threat alone, and Cersei could still attack at her leisure. Jaime spoke quietly. "We lose nothing by a brief armistice, sister. If the White Walkers are truly real, an alliance might." Cersei whipped around on him. "Do not question me in front of these men, brother." Her voice was thick with contempt. "I know you pity them, but pity is weakness." Lord Redwine shifted uncomfortably. Tarly's cousin looked between Jaime and Cersei, as though anticipating a brawl. Euron only grinned, apparently delighted at the tension. Sansa seized the moment. Your Grace, if you will not declare a truce, then at least do not blockade the North's shipments of grain or men. We can remain neutral in your southern conflicts. That way, if the threat truly comes, we can rally without fear of your aggression. Bah. Cersei's eyes narrowed. And what does the crown gain from this neutrality? Sansa drew a careful breath. We vow not to join Daenerys Targaryen if she attempts to seize the city by force. We vow not to fight in any southern war. All we ask is you do not turn your armies against the North until the threat of the dead is resolved. An unsettled hush. Euron yawned elaborately, as if bored. The Redwyne men exchanged glances. Jaime studied Sansa with what seemed a spark of admiration, as though he recognized the delicate compromise she was attempting. Cersei tapped her manicured nails on the table. Then she gave a dismissive shrug. Very well. Deliver that vow in writing. I expect terms that name the North's neutrality in any conflict. In exchange, the crown will not march north or hamper shipments. But I promise nothing else. If you renege, or if your brother so much as lifts a finger to aid my enemies, I will bring fire and blood down upon you. Understood? Sansa hesitated, heart pounding. Understood. Cersei's lips curled into a hollow smile. Good. Now, if we have no further myths to discuss, we must plan how to handle the traitors in the Reach. Tarly's cousin spoke up, eager to shift from talk of undead to the more familiar territory of punishing rebels. Sansa stepped back, letting conversation continue, though her thoughts raced. She had secured a fragile agreement of non-aggression from Cersei, contingent on the North staying out of any war with Daenerys. But what if Daenerys truly marched or flew on King's Landing? What then? She and Jon would be forced to stand aside, or risk the North's annihilation. But if we stand aside, we forfeit an alliance with Daenerys that might be crucial in defeating the White Walkers. It was a devil's bargain, but she had no other immediate recourse. She glanced at Arya, who gave her a terse nod. They would have to send word to Jon, do not become embroiled in any southern war, or the North's neutrality is forfeit, and Cersei will strike. They had to keep the focus on the real enemy. If Daenerys pressed her claim now, she would only tear the realm further apart. When the meeting ended, Cersei swept out with Euron close behind, half laughing about how thoroughly they'd cowed the northern girl. Sansa pretended not to hear. Jaime lingered, casting a look of apology before he followed his sister. The Redwyne men offered polite bows to Sansa, uncertain of her place. Tarly's cousin avoided her eyes altogether, aware that she was now party to an arrangement that might conflict with his desire to see the North punished for its supposed betrayal. Finally, only Sansa, Arya, and Brienne remained in the chamber. Sansa leaned on the table, drawing a shaky breath. We have a fragile reprieve, she said softly. We must find a way to warn Jon. He cannot ally with Daenerys if it means incurring Cersei's wrath before we face the Night King. Arya's face tightened. And if Daenerys comes north to fight the dead, we can hardly turn her away. I know, Sansa replied, voice trembling with the enormity of it. One crisis at a time. Let's hope Jon sees the sense in not warring on multiple fronts. We must trust that Daenerys herself can be made to understand. Brienne set a gentle hand on Sansa's shoulder. You've done what you could, my lady. We'll see this through, one way or another. Nasty. Sansa nodded, though her mind whirled. She had sworn to protect the North, not to deliver it bound by southern intrigues. Yet all the roads she saw ahead led to greater conflict if they didn't tread carefully. At least there was a chance, small as it was, that the White Walkers would be faced without the North being stabbed in the back by Lannister armies. That chance might mean thousands of lives saved. That night, Sansa wrote letters to Jon and to any of the northern lords whose ravens might fly a swift route. She explained the precarious terms. The crown would not march on the North, or impede its resources so long as the North swore neutrality in any southern war. She emphasized the importance of focusing on the White Walkers, pleaded with them to hold back from any alliance with Daenerys' conquest until the dead were vanquished, or until they could coordinate a grand alliance that included the crown, though she doubted Cersei would ever stand with Daenerys. Still, at least neutrality might buy time. After the letters were dispatched, she stood at her window, arms folded. The city below was dark, the windows and the sprawling mass of rooftops mostly black. Somewhere out there, the small folk lived day to day, unaware of how close they stood to oblivion. She thought of the north, of the clean cold air and the honest earth beneath her feet. She longed to be there again, away from all the poisonous lords and ladies, away from the memory of Baelish's schemes. But she was here because she had no choice. The realm needed a voice that would not be silenced by fear of Cersei. Turning from the window, she paced until she felt Arya's presence behind her. Her sister spoke quietly. "You're doing all you can. I know." Sansa whispered, "I just hope it's enough." Days rolled into weeks, marked by tense courtesies at feasts and whispered conferences in corridors. Sansa's arrangement with Cersei held. No troops marched north, and the crown did not intercept shipments of supplies or ravens. In return, the North did not declare open support for Daenerys Targaryen, nor did it send any men to aid her cause. Rumors abounded of skirmishes at sea, of dragons spotted near the coast of Essos, and of Euron Greyjoy's fleet mustering somewhere off Crackclaw Point. Every bit of news battered Sansa's composure, for she knew each brush of conflict risked entangling the North. Meanwhile, tidings from the Wall grew grimmer. Whites pressed the eastern coastline. Ghostly sightings rumored near the Frostfangs. The men of the Night's Watch were stretched thin, and Jon was frantically uniting wildlings, freefolk, and northern bannermen to hold the line. Sansa's heart lurched every time a raven arrived. She pictured her brother in the freezing wind, sword in hand, facing the horrors she had only glimpsed in nightmares. She found Cersei's court full of fools who thought the greatest menace was the next pretender to the throne. Sansa spoke again and again of the undead threat, but few listened. Euron openly mocked the idea. Cersei dismissed it. Even Jaime, who seemed the most receptive, had little sway against his sister's will. Tyrion was absent, rumored to be at Daenerys' side. Only Varys in quiet conversation offered any solidarity. Yet even he seemed unwilling to push the matter too far. Sansa suspected he was biding his time, waiting to see if Daenerys would strike, or if Cersei would fall first. The city was a tinderbox. One spark could engulf it in chaos. But Sansa Stark had survived chaos before, and she vowed she would do so again. Each day she shaped careful strategies, forging ephemeral alliances where she could, sowing just enough rumor to disrupt Cersei's absolute grip on the city, yet never enough to provoke an open crackdown. She watched the Red Wine men with interest, guessing they might desert Cersei if a better opportunity arose. She overheard Tarly's cousin muttering about the Queen's cruelty, about how she was no Margaery Tyrell. She knew Euron was only loyal to himself, and she held on to the knowledge that Arya prowled these corridors like a silent guardian, ready to do what must be done if Cersei ever turned on them. That thought gave Sansa the smallest measure of comfort. She was not alone anymore. The nights were the hardest, as she lay awake in the bed once meant for Joffrey's queen. She listened to the wind keening through the stone cracks, the distant hush of the sea, the dissonant hum of a city too large and too hungry. She thought of her father's final moments on the steps of the Great Septite. She thought of the day she had stepped onto that dais, sword in hand, to behead Petyr Baelish. She thought of winter and the long night and the White Walkers. She was a Stark of Winterfell, and she had never felt that truth more keenly. Yet morning always came, and with each dawn she rose, armored in dignity and patience, intent on preserving the North and the realm from a queen's folly and the undead's wrath. 5 hours after she had executed Littlefinger, the city had held its breath. Now, weeks later, it continued to hold that breath, uncertain when the next blow might fall. Sansa prayed they would be ready. She prayed the living would outlast the dark. And if the price of that victory was the cunning she had once scorned, then she would pay it, as the daughter of Ned Stark, who had learned that sometimes the wolf must wear a woman's skin and speak in a voice that can charm or kill. This was the path she had chosen, and she would see it through, whatever the cost. Ga, ki, inya. The nights in King's Landing deepened, lengthened, and each one layered new anxiety atop the last, as if the city's many shadows pressed closer around the Red Keep with every dusk. For Sansa, the city had become a crucible, a place that tested and retested her resolve, her cunning, and the boundaries of her heart. She woke before dawn each morning now, her rest always uneasy, haunted by fragmented dreams, her mother's face Jon lost in a blizzard, the cold blue eyes of White staring out from beneath a frozen moon. She wondered how long a woman could balance herself upon the edge of so many knives before her blood ran for it. On one such morning, the city was shrouded in fog, sea mist trailing like ghosts across the battlements. Sansa, dressed in a high-collared gown of blue-black velvet and heavy wool, the dire wolf brooch bright at her throat. The air was cold even in her rooms, the stones of the castle sweating. She found Arya in the corridor, already awake and restless, her eyes darker than ever, and together they descended to the great hall for breakfast. Few others were present, just a smattering of lesser lords, 2 Tyroshi merchants negotiating loudly, and Brienne standing sentinel by the doors. They ate quietly. Sansa noted every word spoken at neighboring tables, every glance darted toward her and Arya. Since Littlefinger's execution, the Starks had become creatures of interest, objects of fear, awe, suspicion, and, for some, quiet hope. There were whispers of the Wolf Queen in the corridors. She was grateful, at least, that Cersei had not dared to imprison her again. Their truce, however brittle, still held. Halfway through the meal, a messenger arrived. One of Cersei's own pages, thin as a reed, with a nervous energy. He bowed, handed over a folded scrap of parchment, and scampered away. Sansa unfolded it, noting the Queen's handwriting, spare and severe. Lady Stark, attend me at the Maester's tower at once. Cersei Lannister, Queen of the Andals. Sansa exchanged a look with Arya, who shrugged. If it's a trap, you won't go alone, Arya said, her voice low and flat. Brienne nodded from her post, catching the gist. They left together, boots clapping on the stones, the noise oddly muffled in the fog's chill. The Maester's tower was quieter than usual, the corridors empty, but for a lone sentry at the stairs' foot. He stepped aside, pale and wide-eyed at Arya's reputation. They climbed the winding steps, reaching the high room where Cersei awaited. The Queen stood by an open window, the mist curling around her, lending her an almost ethereal aspect. Qyburn stood at her side, flanked by a bored-looking Ser Gregor. You came quickly, Cersei said, not turning. Her tone was almost contemplative, at odds with the usual icy bite. Sansa stopped 3 paces inside. Arya and Brienne hovered at her flanks. You summoned me, Your Grace. Cersei didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gestured to a table, where a map of Westeros was spread and weighted with polished stones. You'll want to see this. She pointed to the north, where new ink marked a shifting front. Ravens have arrived from the Eastwatch and Shadow Tower. The dead had begun to push south. Tormund Giant Spain's wildlings hold for now, but losses are mounting. The Night's Watch pleads for help. Sansa's heart kicked in her chest. The wall has not fallen? Not yet. Qyburn's voice was thin, almost giddy. But there are reports of a breach east of the Frostfangs. The dead swarm along the shore. Winterfell will be next, should the line break. Then? Sansa looked at Arya, who nodded grimly. We must send warning north at once. Jon must know. He's already there. Cersei turned then, her eyes sharp and golden. Not a trace of softness left. He knows. The question is, what will you do? Will you run north and die with your kin? Or will you stay and fight for the living here in King's Landing? Sansa drew herself up. The North will never abandon its own. A sneer twisted Cersei's mouth. So be it. But if you depart, the truce is broken. If you leave this city without my leave, I'll take it as a sign the North means to ally with Daenerys. And I'll send my armies to ravage every northern hold. You must choose loyalty to your family or the fragile peace you've brokered. Edsimhasi. Arya bristled, one hand on her dagger. You'd murder thousands just to spite us. Cersei's smile was knife-thin. You mistake me, girl. I would do what I must to keep the realm. The realm is all. Even now, Daenerys lingers in Dragonstone. If she lands in the capital, she'll bring fire and death. I cannot afford two fronts. Sansa stared at the map. The dead advancing. The north imperiled. Her own body felt made of glass. Every thought a hairline fracture. You have my answer, Your Grace, she said after a moment, voice cold and clear. The north stands by the living. If you would make us your enemy, you'll face more than just snow and wolves. Cersei's laugh was soft. We'll see. As Sansa turned to leave, Qyburn spoke up. A final word, my lady. If you wish to ride north, we cannot stop you. But know that the Queen's word is her bond. Break faith, and there will be no mercy for your people. His smile was a grotesque parody of kindness. Sansa met Arya's eyes at the door. We ride north, she said, her mind racing with the implications. We leave at once. They descended the steps quickly. Brienne fell in behind, wordless but determined. Sansa sent a page for horses, and Arya ran ahead to gather provisions and their most trusted guards. 2 Northmen sworn to House Stark, plus Podrick Payne, who'd volunteered for every dangerous errand since arriving in the city. As they assembled in the stables, a commotion arose in the yard. Shouts, the pounding of hooves, the clanging of gate chains. Sansa peered from the stable door, heart pounding. A group of goldcloaks rode out from the Red Keep, banners streaming, the Lion of Lannister raised high. For a wild moment, Sansa wondered if Cersei meant to arrest her. But the guards thundered through the gates, turning north along the King's Road, not toward the stables. Arya reappeared, leading 2 sturdy horses. They're clearing the road, Arya said. They want us gone. Cersei means to force our hand. Daum? Brienne mounted up, her face grave. We'll ride hard. The sooner we're beyond the city, the better. Sansa swung into the saddle, her body thrumming with the urgent energy of flight. Arya and Podrick took the lead, the Northmen flanking. They rode out the city's northern gate at a gallop, the morning's fog swallowing them whole. The ride was brutal, the cold biting at their faces, the roads slick with ice and mud. By dusk, they'd cleared the farms and market villages that ringed King's Landing, pushing hard into the highlands beyond. They rode by moonlight, stopping only to water the horses and eat a crust of bread. No words passed between them for hours. The danger was too real, the urgency too pressing. At a lonely inn on the edge of the Crownlands, Sansa called a halt. The stable was empty, but the fire in the taproom burned low, and an old woman with a drooping eye poured them wine and set out hard cheese and salted fish. They ate hungrily, the warmth a balm against their frozen hands. Sansa asked after news from the north. The innkeeper shook her head. Some say the dead walk, she whispered. Others say it's just wildlings or bandits. But I've seen lights in the sky, cold fires over the hills. I lock my doors at night now and pray for sunrise. The room grew quiet. Arya chewed her bread, staring into the hearth. Brienne oiled her sword, eyes distant. Sansa closed her eyes, feeling the exhaustion seeping in. We'll reach White Harbor in 3 days if we ride hard, Arya said. From there, we can get word to Jon. Sansa nodded. We'll rest a few hours, then ride before dawn. She lay in her cloak by the dying fire, dreams filled with the sound of distant hoofbeats and the gnashing teeth of the dead. When she woke, the world was still dark, the air sharp and brittle. She shook Arya gently, and together they roused the others. By the time the sun crested the hills, they were already back on the road. The ride north was a blur of frozen fields, dark forests, and wary villages. Sansa sent ravens from every post. Short, urgent letters. The dead advance. Hold the north. Ready Winterfell. The Starks are coming home. At White Harbor, they found the city tense and bristling, the harbor clogged with ships, some unloading grain and salted fish, others crowded with refugees from the north. Lord Manderley himself met them at the gate, his face grave but welcoming. My Lady Stark, Lady Arya, Sir Brienne. News from the wall has reached even here. The city is fortified. My ships are ready to sail upriver at your word. Sansa thanked him, asking for shelter for the night. Manderley offered more. Winterfell has already begun to call the banners, by your brother's order. There is talk of a last stand. You should not linger here. Nen Saga. We'll ride at first light, Sansa promised. She sat up late with Lord Manderley, discussing supply lines, grain stores, how many men could be sent upriver before the snows made the roads impassable. Arya vanished into the city for a time, returning at midnight with a new dagger and a pouch of rare herbs. Gifts from a woman she'd helped in the street, she said, though Sansa guessed at darker errands. By dawn, they were on the road again, racing north along the King's Road, the land growing colder and wilder with every league. Villages thinned, replaced by scattered crofts and abandoned hamlets. At dusk on the second day, they passed the burned shell of an inn, its roof caved and blackened timbers jutting like broken teeth. In the yard, a pack of wolves circled a frozen corpse. Arya's eyes narrowed, and Sansa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. On the third day, they saw the smoke of Winterfell's chimneys, black columns, twisting up into the steely sky. Sansa's breath caught in her throat. After so long in exile, so many years of loss and wandering, the sight of her home was almost too much to bear. They crossed the drawbridge, the iron portcullis creaking up for them. Inside the walls, the courtyard was full of movement. Men drilling with pikes, women stacking sacks of grain, blacksmiths hammering at new arrowheads. Davos Seaworth hurried to meet them, his face lined with worry but bright with welcome. My lady, you're safe. Thank the gods. Arya, Sir Brienne. We feared the worst when the word from King's Landing turned dark. Sansa dismounted, almost collapsing into Davos' arms. How fares Jon? Davos' expression tightened. He rides the line at the wall, pushing back the whites near Eastwatch. We send ravens, but receive little word. Winterfell's banners are raised. The Karstarks have joined us, the Mormonts, the Glovers, and more come every day. We prepare for siege, as you commanded. Sansa nodded. You've done well. We must hold this ground. The dead are coming. Arya moved through the crowd, speaking softly with old friends, reassuring nervous lords. Sansa climbed the familiar steps to the great hall, where Maester Walken waited with a stack of letters and a pot of steaming cider. She drank greedily, letting the warmth seep into her bones. She spent the night in her old chamber, the heavy fur blankets a comfort, the stone walls sheltering her from the world's howling. In the morning, she awoke to a fresh fall of snow, the world outside the window muffled and clean. For a moment, she simply lay there, listening to the wind and the creak of timbers. She was home, at last. But there was little time for rest. That day, Sansa convened a council of the Northern Lords. The hall filled with men and women in thick wool and furs, each bearing their house's crest. They stood when she entered, their eyes full of hope and dread. Davos called the meeting to order. Sansa stood at the head of the table, Arya and Brienne at her side. The dead march from the north, she said, without preamble. Jon fights them at the wall. We will not abandon him. Winterfell will stand. The north remembers, and the north will not fall while any of us yet breathe. Lord Glover raised his voice. What of the Lannisters, my lady? We hear Cersei plots to march on us if we aid the Targaryen. Sansa nodded. She threatened me, yes. But the threat of the dead is greater than any queen's ambition. If Cersei moves against us, she'll find nothing but snow and steel. We are alone, but we are strong together. The North has faced worse winters. We will face this one, and survive. Nene, Lady Lyanna Mormont, fierce as ever, pounded her small fist on the table. The dead won't find the North wanting. We'll give them a fight they'll remember. A murmur of agreement passed through the hall. Sansa's heart swelled with pride. That night, she climbed to the battlements and looked out across the fields, white and silent beneath the moon. She remembered her father's words. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. She repeated them softly, feeling the truth in them like a pulse. Days passed in a flurry of preparation. Sansa directed the fortification of the walls, the rationing of grain, the training of every man and woman able to lift a blade. Arya led scouts beyond the walls, returning with grim reports. Bands of the dead moving in the woods, the signs of skirmishes, burned villages. Brienne drilled the guards with relentless patience, shaping them into a force that could withstand the coming storm. Ravens arrived each dawn, some bringing desperate pleas for aid from outlying holds, others carrying warnings from Joan's commanders at the wall. The army of the dead moved with terrifying speed. Each day, their line pushed further south, overrunning outposts and scattering survivors. Sansa found herself at the heart of a storm, every decision weighty, every hour precious. She took to walking the walls late at night, her breath steaming in the cold, her thoughts heavy with what was to come. Sometimes she found Arya there, silent and still, watching the darkness beyond the fires. On the 5th day, a rider approached from the east, stumbling through the snow at breakneck speed. The gates opened, and a man in wildling furs staggered through, his face pale and streaked with blood. "My lady," he gasped. "Jon Snow, he sent me. The wall is breached. The dead come for Winterfell. They'll be here in days." A hush fell over the courtyard. Sansa steadied the man, asked for every detail. The Night King himself had led the assault, smashing through Eastwatch with ice and magic. Jon fought a retreat, holding what ground he could. But the dead did not tire, did not break. "We have little time," Sansa told her council. "Gather every able body, the living stand here." They worked through the night, torches flickering along the walls, every hand put to use. Arya slipped away, returning before dawn with news of the dead's vanguard, approaching from the north. The first skirmish would come within the day. Sansa stood in the heart of Winterfell's yard, directing the last of the preparations. The sun rose, pale and cold, over a fortress transformed into a final bulwark. The banners of House Stark snapped in the wind, wolves rampant against a field of white. The gate was barred, the walls manned, the fires banked high. Sansa's heart pounded with dread and determination. The battle began at dusk, with the sky a bruised purple, snow falling thick and fast. The dead came in waves, silent and implacable, their eyes glowing with blue fire. The defenders met them with arrow and axe, with fire and steel. Arya moved like a wraith among them, striking from shadow to shadow. Brienne held the gate with Davos, her sword singing as she cut down white after white. Sansa directed from the walls, relaying orders, sending reserves where the line buckled. The noise was overwhelming. A cacophony of screams, the clang of steel, the inhuman shrieks of the dead. For hours, the battle raged, the living giving ground only inch by inch. By midnight, the dead had scaled the walls in 2 places. Sansa herself was forced to take up a dagger, stabbing at a white that burst through a side door, its hands clawing for her throat. She fought with the cold clarity of desperation, remembering every lesson learned in King's Landing, every cruelty survived. Then, with a howl that shook the stones, a direwolf burst into the yard. Ghost, Joan's companion, teeth bared, fur matted with blood and snow. Sansa felt a surge of hope at the sight. Moments later, Jon himself appeared, battered and exhausted, sword blazing with icy light. He fought his way to Sansa's side, his voice hoarse. "We hold here, or we die." Sansa nodded, eyes stinging with tears and determination. "Then we hold." The night passed in a blur of terror and valor. As dawn broke, the dead were repulsed, their ranks broken by the defenders' courage and the coming of the sun. The cost was terrible. Hundreds dead, the walls scorched and splintered, but Winterfell stood. In the aftermath, Sansa moved among the wounded, offering words of comfort, tending wounds with her own hands. She found Arya in the Godswood, sitting silent beneath the heart tree, her hands stained with blood. She knelt beside her sister, and together they wept for Akal, the living and the dead, for the broken and the saved, for the childhood that had been buried with every fallen friend and every enemy who had bled their last upon the snow. Sansa wrapped an arm around Arya's shoulders, felt the tension in her body and the exhaustion, the brittle edge to her breath. Arya did not weep aloud. Her tears fell silent and furious, streaking through the soot on her cheeks. The godswood was quiet, save for the soft hiss of snow melting on the weirwood's roots, red leaves trembling overhead as if the tree itself mourned with them. They sat together until the light in the east had brightened from pewter to the bruised blue of a northern morning. Then Arya stood, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "We survived the first night," she said, her voice ragged but resolute. "But they'll come again. The Night King won't stop." She hesitated, glancing at Sansa, something unreadable in her eyes. When the dawn came, they fell back. "He's learning. He's waiting for weakness." "No." Sansa nodded. Her own voice felt like it belonged to someone older. "We won't give him one. We're Starks. This is our home. Let the dead come and test our strength again." But the words tasted hollow, even to her own ears. Too many of their people lay dead in the yards and atop the walls, and the pyres were already being built in the snowy fields. The lords and captains assembled that morning in the great hall. "Hi." Jon's return brought a hush to the room, and as he entered, hair matted, face gray with fatigue, sword strapped to his back, every eye turned to him. Sansa saw at once how the battle had marked him. He walked as if every step cost him a measure of pain, yet there was a fire in his eyes, the stubborn spark that had carried him through so much loss. "My lord," she said quietly, stepping forward to greet him. They embraced, not as lord and lady, nor king and regent, but as siblings in a world collapsing under its own ancient weight. Jon let out a shaky breath and looked around the hall. The wall is lost. Eastwatch is gone. Castle Black is abandoned. The dead ride for us now, marching through the snows by the thousands. If we don't hold Winterfell, there's nothing between them and the world of the living. Bah! Lord Glover, his arm in a sling, scowled. "We lost 100 men last night. The Karstark outpost at Last Hearth sent its last raven before dawn. Overrun. All dead or risen. The Night King's hosts will be here within a day. 2 at most." Sansa listened to the grim accounting. Numbers of wounded, stores of food, the state of the walls, the remaining dragonglass and wildfire. She took notes, her mind spinning through the possibilities. If they could not hold, they must have a fallback, a way to evacuate the children and the wounded, at least, to the woods or the river. But every plan seemed a half-measure, a desperate hedge against the inevitable. Jon took the seat at the table's head. "We hold," he said simply. "If we fall, we die and rise as enemies to our own kin. We'll arm everyone who can fight, men, women, even the children old enough to swing a blade. I'll send word to the Vale and the Riverlands, though I doubt help will come in time. Sansa, organize the food, the water. Arya, you'll lead the scouts. Brienne, you'll command the main gate with the Mormonts and Glovers." Nah. No one challenged his orders. Sansa saw the relief in their faces. Someone was leading. Someone who'd faced the dead and lived. But as she met Jon's eyes across the table, she saw the shadow there. The fear that even his stubborn courage might not be enough this time. They dispersed to their tasks. Sansa found herself at the center of a web of frantic industry, issuing commands, organizing ration lines, comforting crying children whose mothers had died in the night's onslaught. She remembered what her mother had once said, when the North was quiet and safe. "Compassion is not weakness, Sansa. Sometimes it's the only armor we have left." She moved from the kitchens to the storerooms, ensuring that bread was baked, ale and water carried to the wounded. When a woman wept for her husband, Sansa knelt and held her, letting the sorrow flow out like water. When a child clung to her skirts, Sansa knelt and whispered stories of the old gods, promising that they watched over the brave. Each act felt small, a candle in the dark, but she saw how the small folk clung to her, and to hope as they had clung to the promise of the North in the years when hope was all they had. As evening came, the wind changed. The temperature dropped. The snow began to fall again in great, silent flakes. Arya slipped into Sansa's solar, hair dusted with frost. "They're massing in the woods beyond the broken tower," she said. "Whites by the hundreds, maybe thousands. I saw a giant among them, A white, not living, with blue eyes bright as beacons. Sansa shuddered. How long? They'll come tonight or the next. The Night King leads them himself. I saw him riding, an undead dragon at his side. He's holding back, watching. Testing the walls, testing us. Jon joined them not long after, stripping off his battered cloak and dropping into a chair. We'll need everyone at the walls tonight. Davos is setting up wildfire charges and the archers are ready. But if the Night King flies over the wall on that dragon, Sansa forced herself to think. We'll keep the children and wounded in the crypts. They're the deepest part of the castle. I've sent for the dragon glass weapons you stored here, and Brienne's posted men at every stairwell. If the dead get inside, we fall back to the Great Hall. Then the gods would, then the crypts, if we must. None. Jon's face was pale. If the dead rise in the crypts, if we fall, they'll have nowhere to run. We fight until the last, Arya said simply. That's all we can do. Night fell swift and complete, the sky low with clouds, the snow swirling around the battlements. Sansa stood on the ramparts as the first howls sounded from the woods, a chorus of voices, human and inhuman, rising together in a song of hunger. The defenders braced, torches blazing along the parapets, arrows nocked and ready. The whites came on in waves, rushing the walls in a torrent of rotting flesh and bone. The archers loosed, dragon glass-tipped arrows hissing through the night, felling dozens. But for every dead that dropped, another climbed atop its corpse, heedless of pain or fear. The giants struck the gates with tree trunks, smashing the wood and iron. But Brienne and her shield wall held firm. Wildfire erupted in green gouts where Davos had laid the traps, turning 100 whites to cinders. Arya darted along the walls, moving like smoke, her blade flashing in the torchlight. Sansa remained atop the central tower, relaying orders with a shout, dispatching runners to the weak points as they formed. She felt the pulse of battle in her blood. Fear and purpose fused in the crucible of war. Above it all, the Night King rode on his dragon, circling beyond bowshot, his cloak billowing, his eyes fixed on Winterfell like twin stars of ice. Sansa felt his gaze even through the snow, a cold that reached her bones. When the dragon swooped low, spewing blue fire on the southern wall, the stones exploded in a fountain of ice and debris. Men screamed and fell, the breach opening wide. Jon and his men rushed to plug the gap, and the fighting there was fierce, sword on bone, fire against darkness. The hours blurred into a nightmare. Shouting, screaming, the stink of blood and burnt flesh. Sansa found herself pressed into action when a squad of whites broke through the eastern sally port. She drove her dagger through the skull of one, hands sticky with gore, heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst. She heard Arya's voice somewhere behind her, calling orders, steady and fierce. She saw Brienne, armored and bloody, rallying the men at the shattered gate. At last, just before dawn, the dead fell back, drawn by the Night King's silent summons. The defenders slumped on the walls, dazed and exhausted. The snow was red with blood and littered with the bodies of friends and foes alike. Sansa staggered to the yard, her dress torn, her hands trembling. Jon limped toward her, eyes wild. "We held," he said, almost in disbelief. "We held again." Sansa wept then, for all that they had lost and all they still might lose. She wept for the North, for her father, for everyone who had never returned from the wars. Jon embraced her, and Arya wrapped her arms around them both. For a moment, they were simply siblings, not kings and queens, not soldiers, not survivors. But the respite was brief. As the sun struggled through the clouds, the Night King's army regrouped at the edge of the forest, now swollen by the bodies of those who had fallen in the night. Ravens circled above, black specks against the gray sky. The council met again. Sansa, voice hoarse, counted the wounded and the dead. Fewer than half their fighters remained, and many were too hurt to stand. The food stores would last a week at most, the water less if the wells froze. Despair was a shadow at the table, but Sansa would not let it take root. "We can't hold forever," Lord Glover said, face haggard. "We can't. We're spent. "Button?" Jon set his jaw. "We buy time. Every hour we hold, more people escape south. Every hour the living stand, the Night King grows weaker. We can't let him take Winterfell. If he does, he'll sweep the rest of the world in ice." Sansa met his gaze, understanding what he meant. "We make Winterfell his grave." It was Arya who spoke the next thought aloud, as if she'd plucked it from Sansa's own mind. "If we can kill the Night King, the army falls. All the tales agree on that. We've seen it happen. Kill a White Walker. The dead he raised drop." Jon nodded. "I'll ride out with the best we have left. I'll find him. We'll use the crypts as bait, draw him in. If he wants the last of House Stark, let him come for us." "No," Sansa said, her voice hard. "You'll not ride alone to your death. We do this together." A plan formed, desperate and wild. Arya, silent as moonlight, would scout the woods and try to slip past the dead, searching for the Night King's path. Jon would gather the last of the knights and wildlings for a final sortie, aiming to draw the Night King and his lieutenants to the Godswood. Sansa would take the children, the wounded, and the non-combatants to the crypts, where the last stand would be made if all else failed. That evening, Sansa visited the Godswood, alone, but for the great white direwolf who padded at her side. Ghost lay at her feet as she knelt beneath the weirwood, her breath steaming in the cold air. She did not pray for deliverance. She prayed for strength, for the wisdom to do what must be done, for the courage to meet death as a Stark. She rose and walked the walls, speaking to every man and woman she could. "If we fall as wolves, not sheep," she told them. "Hold fast. The North remembers. The North endures." In every tired face, she saw hope flare, if only for a moment. In the darkest hour before dawn, the Night King came. His dragon's scream split the sky, and the dead charged, faster and more furious than before. The gates splintered, the walls crumbled, and the last defenders fell back to the keep. Sansa led the survivors down into the crypts, the bones of old kings watching from their cold niches. Arya melted into the chaos, seeking a path through the dead. Jon and Brienne held the Godswood, with a ring of Northmen and wildlings, dragon-glass swords flashing in the moonlight. The Night King entered Winterfell, his army at his back. He rode his dragon through the shattered gate, blue fire spewing, and landed in the yard with a crash that shook the stones. It was there in the Godswood that the end came. Jon faced the Night King beneath the bloody branches of the heart tree, sword drawn, breath ragged. Sansa, hidden below in the crypts, listened to the battle above, the screams, the roar of fire, the silence that followed. Arya found her moment, as she had in the Hall of Faces and the halls of the Red Keep. She moved through shadow, unseen, unheard, and struck. Her blade found the Night King's heart. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he shattered, a sound like a glacier breaking, and the dead collapsed where they stood. Bones and rags, dust and silence. When the sun rose, Winterfell still stood. Jon found Sansa in the crypts, Arya at her side, Brienne battered but alive. The survivors gathered in the yard, staring at the remains of the Night King's army, nothing but corpses now, truly dead at last. Sansa stood atop the battlements and looked out across the north. The snow was red, the sky clear for the first time in days. She thought of all she had lost, all she had fought for, all she had become. She was the last daughter of House Stark, and the North still stood. In the days that followed, they burned their dead, mourned the lost, and began to rebuild. Jon lingered in the Godswood, silent and somber. Arya spoke little, vanishing for hours at a time. Brienne oversaw the training of new guards, her arm in a sling but her spirit unbroken. Sansa walked the halls of Winterfell, speaking to every child, every widow, every man who had fought and survived. She saw the North's strength in their eyes, the same strength she had seen in her mother, in her father, in every Stark who had held this land against the dark. Letters arrived from the south. Cersei was dead, slain by her own ambition as Daenerys' armies swept the city. Tyrion wrote from the ruins of King's Landing, offering peace and alliance. The realm was shattered, but the North was whole. One evening, As the snows melted and spring hinted on the wind, Sansa stood upon the ramparts with Arya and Jon at her side. The fields were empty now, but green shoots pushed up through the bloodied earth. "We survived," Jon said softly. "We endured." "For now," Arya replied. "There will always be another winter, another threat." Sansa nodded, feeling the weight of it. But for the first time in years, she felt hope, real hope, fierce and bright as fire. "We will face it together," she said. "As a pack. As Starks. Nam's show." They watched the sun set over the north, and in its dying light, Sansa saw the future not as a battlefield, but as a promise. The North would remember. The North would endure. And she, Sansa Stark, would lead them, no longer the girl in the shadows of the Red Keep, but the wolf who had survived every storm. Her story was not finished. It was only beginning. And as the stars wheeled overhead, the last daughter of Winterfell stood unbowed beneath their light, ready for whatever the dawn would bring. K. Winter in the north broke not with sun, but with the gradual yielding of the cold, the slow thaw of earth and heart. In the days and weeks after the fall of the night, King Winterfell was a place suspended between mourning and the flickering promise of rebirth. The snow receded, bearing muddy courtyards, blackened walls, and a scarred but living people. It was in these uncertain days that Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell, discovered the true weight of survival. The labor of rebuilding not only walls and gates, but the trust and courage of a battered people. The first task was the tending of the dead. Funeral pyres rose like forests across the fields outside the castle, black smoke spiraling skyward each dawn and dusk. Every name was spoken, every family honored, every last body given to flame, not earth, as a final denial to the Night King's claim. Sansa stood at the edge of each pyre, her hair unbound, her cloak of white wolf fur trailing in the mud. She spoke not only the ancient words, but her own prayers. Pleas for peace, for memory, for the return of spring. Arya was seldom at her side, but Sansa saw her sister at the edge of every crowd, her shadow darting among the trees, her silence as eloquent as any speech. Arya had changed, her eyes sharper, her silences deeper. She did not join the feasts or linger at the fires. She drifted through Winterfell like the spirit of vengeance she had become. And Sansa learned to let her be, knowing that grief had many faces, and Arya's was not meant for comfort. Jon, too, bore the scars of victory. He had saved the North, and yet the cost weighed visibly on his shoulders. Sansa often found him in the Godswood, silent beneath the weirwood, his direwolf ghost lying beside him. He answered when called, and he led when needed, but the lightness she remembered from childhood was gone. The burden of command, the loss of friends, the knowledge that the world had been saved at such price. All this had carved lines into his face. Sometimes, when dusk stretched long shadows across the snow, Sansa watched him and wondered if the wound inside him would ever truly heal. The news from the south arrived in waves, each letter a pebble tossed into the pond of the North's recovery. Daenerys Targaryen's dragons had flown over King's Landing, her armies sweeping aside what little resistance Cersei Lannister had mustered. The city burned, and the Iron Throne melted beneath dragonfire. Cersei's death was whispered in every hall, her fall a warning to all who would claim power without justice. Tyrion Lannister wrote from the ruins of the capital, his letters measured, his offers of peace and alliance heavy with apology and grief. Sansa read each missive at her window, the parchment soft beneath her fingers, and weighed every word. The realm was broken. Houses that had once ruled now cowered, cities starved, trade faltered. The Stormlands bickered with the Reach, the Riverlands warred with outlaws. Dorne sent only silence. Daenerys offered a new order, but her path was marked with fire and fear. One night, in the flickering candlelight of her solar, Sansa called a council of her most trusted. Jon, Arya, Davos, Brienne, and Maester Wolkan gathered around her table. The air was sharp with the tang of snow and the scent of burning pine. "The realm calls for unity," Sansa began, her voice steady. "Daenerys offers alliance, but at the price of the North's fealty. She demands we bend the knee as the Southern lords will soon do. Yet the North has paid more than any for this peace. We have bled and burned. We have stood alone when all others fell. The North remembers, and the North endures." Jon looked up, weary but resolute. "You know my feelings, Sansa. The dead are gone, but the living must find a way to share this world. Daenerys is not her father. She wants to rebuild, not conquer. Nectar's too. She burned a city," Arya interjected quietly. "She burned those who surrendered. What good is peace if it's built on fear?" Davos cleared his throat. "The men speak of it, my lady. They fear the Dragon Queen's justice. They say the North cannot be ruled from the South. Not by dragonfire." Brienne met Sansa's eyes. "You are the hope of the North now. Your people look to you. Whatever path you choose, they will follow." Sansa nodded, feeling the truth of it as both a comfort and a burden. "We will answer Daenerys' letter with honesty. We will not bow. The North will be free. We will trade. We will offer friendship, but we will not kneel to any crown forged by fear." "Gee." Jon's lips twitched in the faintest smile. "Father would be proud." Sansa felt a lump rise in her throat, but she swallowed it. "I hope so." The reply was penned that night, sealed with the direwolf of House Stark. Sansa sent it with a courier she trusted, a woman who had fought in the battle and lost her brother to the Whites. The message was simple: the North is free. We offer peace, not fealty. Let us live as neighbors, not subjects. As the courier rode south, the days in Winterfell grew longer, the sun lingering a little later in the sky, the air sometimes scented with the faint promise of mud and thawing earth. Sansa walked the walls each dawn, her cloak catching the new wind. She made herself known at every meal, every council, every moment when her presence could steady those who wavered. The North had always been hard country, but she saw how even the strongest needed a guiding hand, a reminder of who they were and what they had endured. Arya vanished for 3 days, returning with news from the coast. She had heard word of Ironborn raiders preying on villages left defenseless after the battle. Sansa sent ravens to the lords of the western shores, ordering every longship burned, every Ironborn put to flight. When the lords hesitated, Arya rode out herself, and the tales that returned, of a ghost-faced girl who fought like death itself, were enough to drive the invaders away. Sansa knew Arya would not stay in Winterfell forever. Her sister's restlessness was a living thing, as much a part of her as the steel in her voice. Meanwhile, Jon rode with a patrol of wildlings to the Shivering Sea, where refugees gathered in makeshift camps, terrified of every white cloud or distant howl. He returned with dozens, women, children, old men, bringing them into Winterfell's fold, feeding them from the dwindling stores. Sansa watched him, saw how the people responded to his kindness, and realized that the North could be something more than the sum of its griefs. It could be a haven, a place for all who had nowhere else. One afternoon, as Sansa reviewed the ledgers of the Winterfell storehouses, a shadow fell across the page. She looked up to find Arya standing in the doorway, dressed for travel, her sword at her side. "I'm leaving," Arya said without preamble. Sansa set aside her quill, steeling herself. "Where will you go?" Arya shrugged, her eyes distant. "There's a ship in White Harbor bound for the west. No one knows what lies beyond the edge of the maps. I want to see it. I want to find a place where I'm not just a Stark, or a killer, or a girl with too many ghosts." Sansa rose and crossed the room, gathering her sister in a fierce embrace. "You'll always be a Stark," she whispered. "Wherever you go, you're my sister. You're the hope I clung to when I had nothing. Write to me if you can. Send ravens or dreams, or whatever you find in those wild lands." Arya squeezed her tight, and for a moment Sansa thought she felt tears on her sister's cheek. "I will. And you look after Jon. He needs you more than he knows." "I know," Sansa replied softly. Jon rode in from the Godswood as Arya prepared to depart. He hugged her with a trembling ferocity, unable to speak at first. "Be safe," he managed at last. "Come home if you ever can." Arya nodded. "Take care of Ghost. And Sansa. And yourself." They watched her ride away. her horse kicking up mud in the newly thawing yard, her silhouette growing smaller and smaller until it vanished into the wild white north. Spring crept northward in slow, uncertain steps. The courtyards filled with the chatter of birds. The river broke through the last ice with a roar. Sansa oversaw the rebuilding of the walls, the planting of the first hopeful seeds. She worked alongside the small folk in the gardens, learning to dig and weed, her hands blunted and rough by the end of each day. She laughed with children who had never known peace before, found joy in small things: a loaf of fresh bread, a song at twilight, the quiet hush of the godswood after rain. Jon spent long days on horseback, patrolling the far-flung edges of the north, but returned each evening to sit beside Sansa at the great table. They spoke of small things, avoiding the shadow of the past. Some nights he would tell her stories of wildlings who had learned to hunt elk in the old ways, of free folk who had begun to settle, who planted their first crops in centuries. Other nights he would simply listen as Sansa recounted the progress of the walls, the rumors from the south, the slow but steady recovery of their home. One night, as the last embers died in the hearth, Jon said quietly, "They want you as queen, you know." Sansa looked at him, startled. "The North has a king." Jon shook his head, a sad smile ghosting across his lips. "Not anymore. I've seen enough blood for 100 lives. I was never meant to rule. You've done what I never could. You saved them, Sansa. You gave them hope." Sir." Sansa was silent for a long moment, the weight of his words settling around her like the first fall of snow. "I never wanted a crown. I only wanted to keep our people safe, to build something that would last." "Then that's what makes you worthy of it," Jon said, his voice gentle. "You'll be the North's first queen. I'll stand beside you if you'll have me. But the North is yours now." The next day, Sansa called a gathering in the Great Hall. The lords and ladies of the North, the small folk and the freedmen, even a handful of free folk and wildlings, all crowded into the stone vaults. Jon stood at her side, his cloak plain and unadorned, the crown of the North left upon the table. Sansa spoke not of glory, nor vengeance, nor the wounds they all bore, but of healing. "We have suffered, and we have survived," she said, her voice ringing clear in the hall. "We have seen the worst that winter can bring. Yet we endure. We remember. We rebuild. Today, I do not ask you to kneel. I ask you to stand, with me, and with each other, as one people, one North. Not a kingdom of war, but a home for all who wish to live free." Then there was a hush, then a single voice. Lyanna Mormont, small but unshakable. "Queen Sansa of House Stark," she cried, her voice fierce. "The North remembers." A roar swept through the hall. Swords were lifted, oaths shouted, tears shed. Sansa's heart swelled and broke at once, filled with pride and terror and love. They crowned her with a circlet of pale weirwood and silver, the dire wolf emblazoned at its front. Jon placed it on her brow, his eyes shining with something like relief. The feast that followed was wild and joyous, a celebration not only of survival, but of rebirth. The halls rang with laughter and song. The scars of war remained, but for one night, they felt light as air. As the months passed, Sansa grew into her rule. She held court in the Solar, resolving disputes between lords and free folk, hearing petitions from new settlements on the borders. She oversaw the rebuilding of towns destroyed by the dead, sent aid to the riverlands, forged trade with the free cities. When Daenerys' reply came, surprisingly gracious, offering friendship and the promise of open borders, Sansa breathed easier. The dragons did not fly north. Peace, for now, held. Jon spent more and more time in the wilds, helping wildlings build their new homes, hunting in the woods, sometimes vanishing for weeks at a time. He always returned, and Sansa always welcomed him, but she knew he could not be caged. His wounds would heal best in solitude and in the cold wild wind. Brienne became Sansa's sworn shield, her counselor and friend, overseeing the new order of knights that pledged themselves not just to one house, but to the North itself. Davos stayed on, his wisdom and wit invaluable, as the North learned the arts of peace as well as war. Spring turned to summer. The fields outside Winterfell bloomed with wildflowers. The new crops pushed green blades from the black soil. The city bustled with new life. Markets reopened. Laughter returned to the walls. Children played in the shadows of towers, once haunted by the threat of death. On the first midsummer after the war, Sansa walked alone to the heart tree, laying her hand upon the scarlet bark. She closed her eyes and let the stillness fill her. She thought of Arya, far to the west, of Jon in the wild, of her mother and father, of every Stark who had walked these halls before her. She thought of all she had lost and all she had found, her people, her strength, her voice. When she opened her eyes, the world was green and gold, the air warm, the future uncharted. From the Godswood, she could see the walls of Winterfell, strong and true, patched and proud, with banners flying from every tower. She saw the people moving below, each carrying the burdens of their own stories, each shaping the new North in their own way. She stood there a long time, feeling the world move forward around her. She was not a child any longer, nor a victim, nor merely a survivor. She was Sansa Stark, Queen in the North. And for the first time, she felt worthy of the title. There would be new challenges. Harvests would fail. Old enemies would test her. The scars of war would linger for generations. But the worst had passed, and she had endured. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the land, Sansa returned to the hall where her people waited. Her people, who would look to her for guidance, for strength, for hope. She took her place at the head of the table, her crown a simple circle of living wood and silver, her heart steady. The story of Sansa Stark was no longer the tale of a girl lost and broken. It was the story of a woman who had walked through darkness and emerged into the light, not unscathed, but unbowed. The story of a wolf who had survived every storm, who had learned the language of pain and joy, and who now ruled the North not by fear, but by love. And so the North flourished, memory and hope woven together beneath the watchful eyes of old gods and new. Sansa Stark's reign became a legend in its own time, not a song of dragons or conquest, but a quiet, fierce music, the sound of peace taking root where nothing but snow and sorrow had once grown. And through every changing season, every hardship and every harvest, the people of the North remembered the queen who had led them from the long night into the dawn, and loved her for it, all the days of her life. Summer in the North came cautiously, like a wounded animal testing the air. Every dawn found Winterfell shrouded in dew and birdsong. Every evening softened by gold slanting through the high windows of the great hall. Yet for all the renewal in the land, Sansa Stark understood that peace, true peace, was not the absence of hardship, but the presence of something fierce and enduring that grew from within a people who had survived fire and ice. She carried that knowledge like a talisman, invisible but ever present, as she led her realm into an age no one had imagined possible. Her first summer as queen was spent as much in motion as in state. She toured the breadth of the North, riding out with a train of bannermen, wise women, new free-folk chieftains, and their restless sons. She visited Deepwood Motte, where Lady Sibel Glover greeted her with hard-won respect, and the forests where the children of House Mormont still hunted alongside their mothers. At White Harbor, Lord Manderly welcomed her with a feast on the river docks, and she stood upon the battlements as his fleet, battered and half-repaired, returned to sea. She blessed every home rebuilt, every orphan housed, every store of winter grain. In each holdfast and village, she listened. The old men told her of years when the wall was nothing but a line on the horizon, and the wildlings were only ghost stories. The young women spoke of planting new fields, of the need for midwives, of hopes that the next harvest would feed not only survivors, but children born free of war. Free-folk chieftains told her of the scars the whites had left on their people. Families sundered, tribes scattered. They asked not for gold, but for a place by the hearth, and laws that would let them live without fear of southern reprisal. In return, Sansa invited their sons to train with Winterfell's men, and their daughters to learn crafts in the kitchens and the smithies. In every place, she gave what she could: grain, counsel, or simply the promise that no Northman or woman would be forgotten. Each night, as the banners of House Stark fluttered in the midnight breeze, Sansa wrote letters. To the maesters of Old Town, asking for books and healers. To the lords of the Riverlands, negotiating the price of timber and wool. To the mothers of the North, inviting them to send their daughters to Winterfell to serve and learn. She wrote to the Iron Bank, negotiating fair loans for those whose homes had burned. She wrote to Daenerys Targaryen, who now ruled the South from the ashes of King's Landing. And though their letters were cordial, each was edged with caution. There would be no more burning queens in the North, Sansa promised. No more dragons in the skies above her fields. She saw the wisdom in caution, for each week brought a fresh challenge. In the mountains above the Dreadfort, outlaws who had once sworn to House Bolton raided the supply trains. Sansa dispatched Roderick Forrester, a hard, honest bannerman, to parley. He returned with bruised knuckles and the surrendered sigils of half a dozen petty lords, who agreed to bend the knee in exchange for mercy. At Hardhome, a splinter group of wildlings refused to pay Winterfell's modest taxes, and Sansa rode there herself, Arya at her side for a time, to hear their grievances. They asked for the right to keep their own gods and marry as they pleased. Sansa granted it, warning only that peace in the North meant respect for all, and justice would be swift for those who broke it. The wildling chief spat and grinned, and Sansa knew the bargain had been struck. Justice in Sansa's North was harsh but not cruel. When a thief stole from the winter stores in Barrowton, Sansa rode for 2 days to judge the case. The man was desperate, a widower, his children near starving. Rather than order his hand removed or his tongue cut, Sansa assigned him to work in the bakeries and the fields, repaying the debt by service. Within a year, he brought her the first loaves of honeyed oat bread she'd tasted since girlhood. And the tale of her mercy spread faster than any raven. Yet, not all wounds healed so swiftly. In the northmost reaches, the shadow of the dead lingered. Some nights, whole villages awoke screaming, haunted by dreams of blue-eyed monsters clawing from the snow. There were children who did not speak, and women who flinched from torchlight, and men who slept with axes under their beds. For them, Sansa established a sanctuary at Last Hearth, inviting old septons and wise women, maesters and singers, to help the broken find their way home. She made it law that no survivor would be turned away. The North endures, she reminded them, but it also remembers. It was in these months that Sansa grew into her power, slowly, the way the land itself woke from frost. Her council changed shape to match the needs of her realm. Brienne, sworn to her side, became more than a shield. She was Sansa's confidant in matters of both war and the heart. Davos Seaworth handled ships and trade, his quick wit winning the trust of Manderley and the lesser lords. The old maester, Walken, managed records and letters, but Sansa sought counsel from every woman who had kept a hall through famine, every healer who had eased childbirth, every carpenter who rebuilt a burned barn. She listened, and the North became hers not by decree, but by consent. Jon's absence left a quiet ache in Winterfell, but Sansa accepted it as one more price paid for peace. He had gone beyond the wall, seeking to guide the wildlings and tend to those scattered by the wars. Letters arrived in his rough hand every few weeks, accounts of strange new birds, of mammoths glimpsed in the high valleys, of children born in free folk tents and named for the lost. Sometimes he wrote of Arya, whose travels took her beyond the shivering sea and into lands Sansa would never see. He told her little of his own loneliness, but Sansa read between the lines and sent him news of home. The birth of foals, the harvest moon, the laughter of children in the yard. There was, after the coronation feast, no further talk of marriage for Sansa Stark. Lords from the Vale, from Old Town, from distant Norvos sent gifts, gems, hunting falcons, rare books, but she answered each with polite thanks and no encouragement. The North was her consort, her child, her future. When, on the first day of true summer, a delegation from the Vale arrived bearing a marriage contract signed by Lord Robert Arryn and pressed by the powerful Royce and Corbray houses, Sansa received them in the solar with Brienne and Lyanna Mormont at her side. "I thank you for your offer," Sansa said, voice even, "but the North must be ruled by the North. I cannot accept the hand of a lord who would make my people kneel to Southern law. Lady Royce, her face pinched with disappointment, protested that the Vale had stood by the Starks in war. Sansa nodded, acknowledging the debt. We will always be allies, but my people bled for this freedom. They will not see it sold for gold or titles. I hope you will remain as friends for the summer feast, but let there be no more talk of crowns outside the north. The Vale men stayed, and at the feast that night, Sansa danced only with children and old men, her laughter ringing clear through the hall. Brienne looked on with quiet pride, and Lyanna, fierce as any wolf, declared, "We have our queen, and she has no master but herself." The years that followed brought both hardship and plenty. The second winter after the long night was milder than any remembered by the oldest in the keep. Sansa's efforts to encourage shared planting and the rebuilding of greenhouses paid off. And even in deep winter, fresh greens appeared on every lord's table. The free folk adapted, some settling in the foothills, some riding with the Stark bannermen as scouts and hunters. Children of wildlings and Northmen grew up together, learning new tales, forging new loyalties. There were challenges that no one had foreseen. When a fever swept through the western valleys, killing old and young alike, Sansa declared all maesters' fees waived and sent every healer from Winterfell on the King's Road, with the Queen's own livery and the protection of her knights. When a band of outlaws claiming to be true Boltons tried to seize Torrhen Square, Sansa rode at the head of her banners and brought them to heel in a single night. She spared their leader, a boy of 19 with more fear than malice in his eyes, and put him to work rebuilding the outlying farmsteads. Trade with the south grew, albeit slowly. The riverlands sent wine and leather, the Reach flax and barley. Gold flowed north, but Sansa never allowed it to become the measure of her people's worth. The north has its own wealth, she told her council. The loyalty of its folk, the strength of its arms, and the memory of every hardship survived. We will never be poor while those things endure. As the years passed, Sansa's legend grew. Singers from White Harbor to the Last River composed ballads about the Wolf Queen who walked the fields and forests, who knew every by-name and every secret path. Old women told stories of her wisdom and her justice, and young girls learned to read in the solar at her invitation, each one dreaming of a future that belonged to them. In the autumn of her third year as queen, Sansa opened the first free school in Winterfell's history, inviting the children of smallfolk and wildlings alike to learn their letters and numbers, to hear the histories of the first men and the tales of the old gods. Brienne grew into her role as captain of the Queen's Guard, her hair streaked with silver, but her sword arm still unmatched. She took on squires from every house, teaching them not just swordplay, but the meaning of honor and the price of keeping an oath. One day, as they watched a new crop of boys and girls spar in the yard, Brienne turned to Sansa and said, "You've made the North into something I never dreamed to see. You've given them peace, my queen, and hope." Sansa smiled, her eyes shining. "I could not have done it without you." In the 5th year of her reign, Arya returned as quietly as she had once left. She arrived on a merchant ship from the west, her hair longer, her face sunburned and wild, her eyes the same old gray. She slipped through the gates at sunrise, carrying nothing but a carved bone flute and a satchel of strange maps. Sansa found her in the Godswood, sitting with her back against the heart tree, eyes closed, listening to the wind. They embraced, wordless at first, then with the laughter and tears that only sisters can share. Arya told her stories of new islands, of green jungles and endless sea, of folk who wore feathers and painted their faces, of a land where winter never came. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Sansa asked as they walked the paths between the trees. Arya nodded. "I found myself, I think. I found a world bigger than our pain. And I missed home." She looked at Sansa, her smile fierce. "You did it. You made it all matter." Sansa squeezed her hand. "Stay this time. At least for a while." Arya grinned. "For a while. Until my feet itch again. You know me." "Done?" They spent long days together, walking the fields, telling tales to the children who begged for stories of both wolves and dragons, of distant seas and the haunted woods beyond the wall. Arya taught the oldest girls to throw daggers and the youngest to move unseen in the snow. In the evenings, she played her bone flute while Sansa sang, her voice as clear as the winter air. Jon returned for a single winter, bringing with him a ragged host of free folk and a giant white wolf grown grayer, but still unbowed. His hair was touched by frost, and his eyes carried shadows. But he smiled more easily and laughed in the halls with the children and the old warriors. He told Sansa he would never rule, never stay long, but that Winterfell would always be his home. Together, the three siblings shared the solar as they had not since childhood, reading, drinking wine, arguing gently about the old stories and what the world might yet become. As the years rolled on, the scars of the long night faded into legend. The people of the north did not forget, but they no longer flinched at the howl of wolves or the creak of winter boughs. Sansa grew older, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes wise and kind. She never remarried, never sought a king or a lover, but found her joy in her people and in the slow, steady work of peace. When Sansa died, it was in her own bed, with Brienne and Arya at her side, the sun just breaking over the towers of Winterfell. The bells rang out across the fields, and the people gathered to mourn not only a queen, but the mother of their hope. She was buried in the Godswood beneath the heart tree, her crown laid at her feet, her story woven into the roots and leaves that had sheltered her all her life. For centuries afterward, the bards would sing of Sansa Stark, the Wolf Queen, of the girl who survived the darkness, who faced every trial with grace, who brought peace to a land of sorrow. They told of the winters she had weathered, the battles she had won not with sword, but with patience, justice, and love. And in every corner of the north, from the White Knife to the Wall, children grew up knowing that peace was not a gift, but a victory, one won anew by every hand, every heart, every voice. And so the north remembered, and so it endured. The seasons spun on. Years passed, marked by festivals and long, patient winters, by fields of wild flowers returning to meadows where whites had once trampled snow and blood. Under Queen Sansa's reign, the north slowly learned to trust joy again. The ghosts of the long night did not vanish, but they became quieter, less insistent, woven into the songs, sung at hearths, and the lessons whispered to children who now played without fear under the shadow of Winterfell's walls. By her 10th summer as queen in the north, Sansa had built not only peace but a culture rooted in the old strength and the new hope. The small folk and the great houses alike had found a steadiness in her rule that no one had believed possible in the years after the dead had marched. The fields yielded richer harvests. The ports at White Harbor bustled with trade from Braavos and Old Town, even sometimes from as far as Pentos. The wildlings, now called free folk by all, prospered in their villages along the lakes and forests, sending furs and honey and the rare ore from mountain mines to Winterfell's storerooms. In the rebuilt septs and in the deep forests, men and women prayed to their gods, old and new, thanking them for days without terror, and for children who did not remember the cold eyes of the Night King. In the evenings, Sansa would walk among her people with Brienne or Arya, or sometimes alone, always listening, to a shepherd's tale of lost lambs, to a smith's hopes for a better forge, to a widow's story of a daughter who would be the first in her blood to learn letters at the school Sansa had opened. Winterfell itself was transformed. The broken stones of war had been quarried anew, fitted with patience and vision. In place of the burned keep, Sansa had ordered a wide, sunlit library built, its windows open to the Godswood, its shelves heavy with books from every kingdom and every age. She walked its aisles often, running her fingers across bindings from Old Town and Braavos, adding her own observations to a growing chronicle of the North's rebirth. The children of the North grew up with a sense of belonging, learning their letters from both maesters and wildling storytellers, their swordplay from Brienne's own hand, and their justice from Sansa's even, gentle guidance. Many noble houses sent daughters to foster at Winterfell, not only to learn courtesy and the craft of running a household, but to train alongside the new order of northern knights, men and women, noble and small folk, wildling and Southron blood alike. The idea of what a lady, or a lord, or a warrior could be had changed forever. Arya's returns were rare and never announced. She came and went like a breeze, her hair often cut short, her laughter wild and unexpected. Each time she arrived, she brought new tales, of islands beyond the western seas where the sun burned red and low, of olive-skinned traders with gold beads in their hair, of distant markets where dragons were spoken of in whispers. She never stayed more than a moon's turn, but while she was there, she would train a new crop of girls to move silently, to read tracks in snow or sand, to trust their own instincts. She always vanished with the first whisper of her old wanderlust, leaving behind only a carved bone flute or a knife of foreign steel for some wide-eyed girl to treasure. Jon's visits were less frequent. He wrote when he could, brief, affectionate letters, often accompanied by pelts or a battered bit of horn found beyond the wall. Sometimes he came himself, riding at the head of a band of free folk, or bringing word of some new threat. Rogue warbands from the Far East, or a clutch of orphans needing sanctuary. He stayed long enough to rest, to talk with Sansa in the Old Solar, to walk with Ghost in the Godswood, then returned north again. The wall, now little more than a line of ancient, snow-crusted stones, had become a place of quiet legend rather than dread. The wilds beyond it belonged to the living. Brienne, ever loyal, was now called the Lady of the Shield. She had earned her own place in northern legend. Under her care, Winterfell's guards became known as the bravest and most honorable in the realm, and squires came from as far as the Stormlands to learn from her. Her friendship with Sansa deepened into a partnership of such trust and affection that the people of Winterfell whispered about it with awe, not scandal. Davos, older and grayer but sharp as ever, oversaw trade and coin. Under his guidance, Winterfell's markets grew as lively as those in Old Town, if not so crowded. He established a shipyard at the White Knife, turning out small but sturdy cogs and galleys that sailed as far as Gulltown and the Arbor. He became the voice for the fishermen and tanners, the keepers of the wild moors. And Sansa often said that without him, the North would never have fed all its children. Lyanna Mormont grew into her own legend, marrying the son of a wildling chief and raising a new generation of warriors at Bear Island. Boys and girls who came of age swimming in freezing surf and sparring with wooden swords, who crossed the sea each year to serve in Winterfell's honor guard. By the 15th year of Sansa's reign, a new rhythm had settled across the north. The great fairs at Winterfell drew singers, merchants, knights, and wise women from every holdfast and village. Tournaments of archery and axe-throwing became as popular as the old harvest festivals. It was not uncommon to see a wildling mother and a noble woman laughing together over mugs of ale, their children chasing each other under the weirwood's boughs. Yet Sansa never allowed herself to forget the old wounds. Every year, on the night when the aurora flickered green and gold above the snows, the anniversary of the Night King's defeat, she held a vigil in the Godswood, reading aloud the names of the fallen from the highborn lords to the youngest orphan. The people would come, bringing candles and tokens, a lock of hair, a broken blade, a letter written in a shaking, childish hand. They wept and remembered, but they also sang, and when dawn came, it was with a sense that they belonged to one another, not only to their queen. One such vigil found Sansa sitting beside a girl of 7 whose mother had perished in the long night. The child stared into the fire, silent. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she asked, her voice small. Sansa stroked her hair. "Not all at once. Some days are worse than others. But the love you had doesn't vanish with the pain. You carry it, and you share it, and slowly you build something new. The pain becomes a memory, and the memory a strength. Then be." The girl nodded, and after a while, she slept with her head in Sansa's lap, as hundreds of others had done before her. As Sansa aged, the work of state became less arduous, more a matter of wisdom and gentle correction than of daily struggle. She saw her people wed and bury, plant and harvest, fight and forgive. She watched as boys and girls she had taught became leaders in their own right. Some rode south, seeking adventure. Others built their homes along the White Knife or the Skago shores. Sansa's council remained the core of her governance, but younger voices, Children of wildlings and Northmen, traders and crafters, wise women and healers, were heard more often in her halls. The southern realms, long wary of the North's independence, gradually accepted Sansa's wisdom and constancy. Trade treaties flourished. Even the Iron Islands, under a reformed line of Greyjoys, sent delegations each spring, eager to learn northern techniques of shipbuilding and salt preservation. Dorne sent sweet wine and fine fabrics. Old Town sent books and maesters eager to study the unique blend of magic and tradition that made the North thrive. Daenerys' rule in the South was not always peaceful, but her respect for Sansa and the North endured. When the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms died, her son sent word to Winterfell, requesting Sansa's counsel on matters of succession and law. She never traveled south again. Her place, she always said, was with her people. But her letters shaped policy from the Trident to the Stormlands. As she grew older, Sansa made plans for the future. She established a council of succession, no longer limited by blood, but by service and merit. The North would be led by those who proved themselves in hardship and hope, chosen by council and confirmed by the voice of the people. She saw to it that every town and village had its own council, every child a chance to read and learn, every warrior a reason to lay down their sword for a plow. In her last years, Sansa spent more time in the Godswood, beneath the great heart tree. Children often joined her there, listening to her stories of wolves and queens, of mothers and daughters, of the long night and the new dawn. She spoke of her own youth, not as a queen, but as a girl who had been afraid and lonely, and who had learned, step by step, to trust herself and her people. One spring morning, Sansa walked through the fields with Arya at her side. The air was soft with the smell of green things growing, and the sky stretched clear above the new wheat. "Will you ever leave again?" Sansa asked quietly. Arya shook her head. "I've seen all I needed. My stories belong here now." Penitini. They walked in silence, two women no longer young but unbroken, bound by blood and memory, and all the choices that had shaped them. When they returned to Winterfell, they found children playing in the yard, their laughter bright and wild. That evening, Sansa sat at the high table, Brienne on her left, Arya on her right, as the hall filled with music and light. She looked out at the people who had become her life's work, their faces open, their voices confident, their future secure, and she felt a fullness that made every past sorrow worthwhile. In the years that followed, Sansa's name became legend. Bards traveled north each winter, eager to learn the ballads that the small folk sang by firelight. Of the wolf queen who tamed the wilds, of the red woman who returned from the sea, of the king who became a wanderer, and the knight who taught girls to wield swords as well as their brothers. Children acted out these stories in the meadows in spring, and in the snowbanks in winter, always ending with the crowning of the queen in the north. When her time at last drew to a close, Sansa chose her own successor, a woman of mixed wildling and Northman blood, raised from childhood in the halls of Winterfell, chosen by council and acclaimed by the people. Sansa died with her hand in Arya's and Brienne's, the sun rising through the window, her crown resting at the foot of her bed. Her funeral was not somber, but a celebration, a feast of gratitude for all she had given. The North continued. The seeds she had planted bore fruit. The children she had taught others, and the line of wise queens and strong councils endured. No invader ever conquered them again. No winter ever broke them. And every year, on the night the lights danced in the northern sky, the people of Winterfell gathered in the Godswood, candles in hand, to sing the old songs and tell the stories of the queen who had led them from darkness into dawn. So peace in the North was no longer a miracle, but a habit, a way of life. Sansa Stark's legacy endured not in monuments, but in the hearts of her people, and in the laughter of their children, who knew that the wolf who survives is not always the fiercest, but the one who learns to endure and to love. Thus the North remembered, thus it endured, and thus, through the long years, the story of Sansa Stark became not a tale of survival, but a song of home.